Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
Oh my child, I know you're hurt and you can't let go. It's not your fault and you don't deserve all the bad and the hurt. I know you tried so hard. I know you've done your part. It's not fair. You did your time. How much longer will you suffer in this life? But don't give up. Just hold on tight. It'll be alright.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Latter-day Survivors. I'm Christina, and I'll be one of your hosts this afternoon for this interview. I have Kendra with me, who will also be hosting. And we are so excited for today's guest. We have with us today Irene of Irene's Entropy with us. And Irene is an awesome person. She is a singer, songwriter, ex-Mormon, engineer, I think, if I got that right. She's just an awesome person. She reached out to me on my personal social media account and invited me to participate in a project she's doing called the Identity Project, which I'll let her tell about when she's ready to tell about. But I was super honored to be asked and got to know her a little bit and invited her to come tell her story. She's just an amazing person. We're super excited to have her. So welcome to Latter-day Survivors, Irene.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I was driving to Minnesota for a gig a couple weeks ago, and I did nothing but listen to this podcast the whole way up for at least 5 or 6 hours, and it was very pleasant. And I love the way that you guys have or share your intellectual conversation. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we're super honored that you'd listen, and we're honored to have you. Yeah.
Yep. Glad to have you here.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
we'll just let you take it away and you can kind of tell your story in whatever way you want.
Cool. If you don't mind, I'd like to start off talking about music. I think that for me, talking about my music and my goals with that is a good starting ground. And then as I start to discuss my songwriting, my story kind of filters in.
Awesome.
So,
that sounds like a good plan.
yeah. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, for everybody out there, I am Irene. If you happen to be a Mormon or ex-Mormon, Irene is my temple name, but I adopted it symbolically as a name that I took from a state of mind that I was in, which centered around obedience and patriarchy and submission. And I decided that if I could take that name, if I could make something of it, I would make something of myself. So that's why I am Irene. And it's Irene's Entropy because, as she mentioned, I am a mechanical engineer working in aerospace. And one of the terms you learn in thermodynamics is entropy, which is a general law of the disorder of energy. And for me, it was a perfect word to describe the disordered energy that was in my mind as I tried to write music to deal with all of my trauma and my emotion. And as that music came out, the one thing about entropy from a physics standpoint is that entropy cannot be stopped. It is one of the only laws that moves forward with time. and it can never be reversed. And I felt that that was a very powerful thing for me, that with this music I'm putting out, and these parts of myself I'm releasing, I can never go back. This is something that I can only move forward with. And that is why it's Irene's Entropy. And I do have an album out on Spotify, Apple Music, any streaming service. And it's called High Water. And that album really centers around, it was not the first album I wrote. It's the first one released. But as I was working on the first album, I was songwriting so much. I ended up with this extra collection of songs that just so happened to fit into this pocket of what High Water became. And that is a representation of me jumping from the old ship Zion, which we as ex-Mormons are all familiar with. You know, if you leave the ship, there is the threat that you will not make it. You will drown in these waters. You cannot survive without the ship or the leaders on the ship. And so the album follows my story of kind of getting the courage to jump. And then, quite honestly, it doesn't really tackle the trauma that I faced. Instead, that album focuses on, I didn't drown and I didn't die. Instead, I found the most beautiful relationships and friendships and love that I didn't even know could exist outside of Mormonism. And so the album really just follows some of those relationships. And then it ends symbolically with me on the beach looking back at this ship that is a speck in the distance. And I reflect on my nightmares and my trauma. And in the end, I decide that, I think the lyrics say, but I'm feeling golden in the moment and I'm not searching for opinions. I don't need that because I have found these relationships. And then the song turns into this kind of upbeat, groovy, kind of Fleetwood Mac style groove, which I always just picture myself dancing on the beach, you know, like around a campfire, just being like, yeah, like life is awesome. And then the final reflection of reap what I sow, which Kendra was talking about. So that's kind of a short clip of what that album is. And I'll probably talk about the first album, which I am recording in the studio now, a lot on this podcast. But I like to start with who I am as an artist and what I've done. So that's a brief overview.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say we've listened to this album, and our listeners can't see this, but Kendra and I are both rocking t-shirts from Irene that represent her album, and super honored to be wearing them because we took a listen to her music and we're kind of addicted to it, both from a lyrical standpoint, as well as the fact that she's just got this amazing, smoky, beautiful voice that you really need to check out. So highly recommend that you go find her after you're done listening to this and follow her on whatever music platform you listen to music on.
Thank you. I just want to say, that the story about Irene and the word entropy and the meaning of that it gave me chills when you were talking about that. So that was pretty awesome. I think a lot of people that leave the church, their families think that they're going to come back eventually, and maybe some of them will. But I think when I left, there was just this feeling of I'm not ever going back. I'm never going back. I will never allow myself to go back. Because once you start deconstructing, once you start deconstructing and actually are able to let go of those things that were your full truth, letting go of those things, you don't want to go back and pick those things up again when they're not going to serve you, when they're not going to work for you, when they're not going to help you to move forward. So anyway, I just really appreciated that about you.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to get nerdy about that stuff. If there's any physicist that listens to this and has corrections for me, I welcome the correction. I'm a big fan of education, but I am limited in, my classes and what I have learned. But entropy, it was so crazy. I took an extra physics class over the summer just because I wanted to know more about physics. And we were talking about entropy, and it was one of those moments where it hit me like a brick. Just a fucking wall, like had just been like hit me. And I didn't know why at the time. I had been playing around with a group of musicians and kind of songwriting, but had not formed a band or obviously a business. I own Irene's Entropy as an LLC. It is my business. But I read the word and I hadn't even discovered what it truly meant yet, but there was something there, some force, whatever you want to call it, that as soon as I read it, literally I stopped listening to the lecture. I just pulled up Google, Wikipedia, and was reading anything I could about the word. I was just so drawn to it. And I went to my band the next week because, we'd been fucking around with all these funny names and stuff. And I was like, what do you guys think about Irene's Entropy? And they're like, what's that? And we tried it out for a couple weeks, and eventually it was just like, yeah, this is it. And it was a really magical moment, but it's just such an amazing concept. Like, because truly when I think about it, a lot of it is about expansion. Like right now, as we speak, the universe is expanding, and it's expanding because of the law of entropy. We cannot go back. And I feel like our brains, once we leave Mormonism, the perfect term for it is just we expand. We were so constrained, and to have your brain expand in psychology, history, science, spirituality, any form, that a term to describe that expansion, but in a way where it cannot be stopped and you cannot go back. It was so beautiful. So that's my nerdy speech on entropy. But thank you for saying that, Kendra.
Yeah, no, I love it. A couple things. I think when I talked to you initially before this interview, didn't you also say that your husband has a degree in philosophy?
Yes. So his bachelor's is in science. He's an ecologist, but his master's is in philosophy. And I'll talk about him later. He's a huge reason, the reason why I left Mormonism. But his thought patterns have been so beautiful to me. He quit his doctorate degree, actually, in philosophy to study Mormonism to get me out. So
wow, that is seriously amazing. He kind of saved your life. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I won't get into his background because I'd love to do interviews one day where he is with me. Because
we would love that.
He has such a cool, because he was never raised Mormon,
mm-hmm.
right? So his point of view or his perspective of the story coming into it and seeing my actions and how I reacted to him and me trying to convert him and then him dropping everything to really study it is a very interesting dynamic. So I'd love to do that one day, but I won't speak for him.
Sure.
But yeah, his perspectives and his ethical, philosophical views of who I was whenever I was Mormon are quite interesting to listen to.
Yeah. We'd be totally open to that at some point when you're ready.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Something you said about the whole world opens up to you, right? When you leave the church and your mind expands and you start seeing things completely differently. And while I think it's the same in general, I think that there's been a lot of regret that I didn't see it sooner, that I didn't leave the cage, that I didn't leave the boat, that I didn't allow my brain to expand and be more open. But in in the process of doing that, I see the whole world differently. It's like, Christina and I talked about this, that it's like we've been wearing sunglasses during the day, or wearing, shades that completely blind us from everything except for what's in front of us, and what we're being told to do. But then you take the glasses off, you leave the cage, and it's not scary. You don't sink. You don't get tossed about by the waves. You do maybe a little bit, but it's nothing like what they say it was going to be like. And the reality has come out that that it's so much more beautiful out here, to be able to see people without the lenses of judgment, without the lenses of, I have something that you don't have, and I need to make sure that you get it and you receive it, and that you also accept it and own it and become this person that's just like me, because they're a bunch of sheep, a bunch of robots doing exactly what we're told. That obedience, that strict obedience, and also the scrupulosity that comes along with it.
Yes.
So anyway, I'm so happy to be out of the church. So happy to be able to have this view and to be able to just love people without any expectation or judgment from them.
That was beautiful. And you made me think of two things to say. The first, in your description of the glasses, reminded me of the lyric in Reap What I Sow. The beginning line says, I was born in rose-colored water that seeped into my eyes and soul. But I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful. And I don't think a lot of people catch that line. But what you were describing, it is blinders, but it's not just blinders of seeing the world differently. It's quite literally your soul. Like when I wrote that, I pictured being birthed and, all the, mess and everything with birth, like being born into this rose-colored water from infancy, right? If you're born into the covenant, which I was, you are born into this world where you don't even have a chance of seeing the world differently. The water, or the essence of being born in the covenant, literally seeps into your eyes, the way you see the world, and your soul, the way that you feel the world. And
yeah, definitely.
What were you going to say, Christina?
I was just going to say, when I told my own story, that is the analogy that I have used from the beginning. Was I've said that I feel like we were born with Mormon lenses on, and like you just said, we never even had an opportunity to see the world any differently than just through those lenses. And once we stepped out, and we didn't even know those lenses could come off, because I don't think we even knew we were wearing them. And once I stepped away and I figured out that I was wearing these lenses and that I could also take them off, and I took them off, I believe that things actually physically looked different to me. And I know that sounds very strange, but like the trees were actually greener all of a sudden. The flowers were more brilliant all of a sudden. People were more beautiful all of a sudden. And the way I kind of
were bluer.
this exactly. And the way I kind of explain it is, I don't know if you've seen those videos that go around where people will gift a colorblind person with these color correcting lenses. That is the way I described leaving the church. Was all of a sudden, it was like I'd been blind my whole life, and I put these corrective lenses on and the whole world lit up.
Yep. And I think that's something that's very hard to describe to someone who has never gone through it, because, and I remember this on my mission when it was the Light the World campaign, around Christmas time. And there was a video the church released where it showed Jesus giving a blind child sight. But at the last second, it switched from Jesus and instead to a doctor giving glasses to a child they couldn't see. And I remember that touched me so much on my mission, and the forceful feeling of thinking that I was giving these people, or the blind, eyes to see through the vision of the church. And I thought I was doing that. However, when you describe what just happened to you, that's not ridiculous at all. You do physically feel such a difference in the way that your senses perceive the world. And it is so insane that you were being so gaslighted to think that what you were doing in reality, you weren't giving sight to anyone. You know, you were blinding people. And the truth, we were taught truth with a capital T. But the truth is that right outside of it, you could step out of that cage at any time and see the world for what it was. But you didn't know you could. And it's such a trap that no one can really understand unless you've been there. People ask me all the time, was it really that bad? I know Mormons and they seem like they're happy and it's fine. I don't understand. When you say you left a cult, was it really that bad?
I'm asked the same thing by people all the time as well.
Yeah. And I just want to shout, yes, it was. And you can't understand it unless you deep dive into those psychological things that are going on inside of your brain from childhood. Sorry, Kendra, were you going to say something?
I was just going to add to that when you're in the church, just like what your song was saying, I've actually listened to that song. I listened to it on repeat for about 3 hours because I wanted to memorize the words. And so I do remember the part that you were talking about. And, you know, the thing about not believing that being blind was beautiful, they don't even know they're blind first, right? They think they have something that they need to share with everybody else. But the thing that they have is what limits them from being anything else but what they are told to be. And the whole thing about being happy in the church, it is all a facade. Like people in the church don't even know what being happy is. People don't know what that feeling of utter joy and happiness without constraints of the judgment of other people. You know, they're all trying to live this beautiful life, but none of them, well, maybe, I guess I shouldn't say none of them, but most of them don't even know that what they're living is a prison. They're living within an organization that tells them who they are, where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to be doing, keeps them so busy that they cannot think for themselves, that they cannot actually enjoy the beauty of the world around them because they're so busy doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different tasks, a couple different callings. And how much difference are those callings really making to the family or to the organization? It's really just about keeping people really busy, so busy that they can't actually think for themselves.
Yes, I hope we touch on that later. If anyone has a pad, I usually have paper on me. I'm an engineer.
I do, and I typically will take notes so that I remember to ask things.
Yeah, somebody put that down. The concept of being kept busy. Write that down. I'm getting a notebook out.
My favorite patients that I see, so I'm a nurse practitioner, my favorite patients that I see are people who are engineers because they come in to their clinic appointments with spreadsheets of all of their vital signs, all of their weights, all of their how much sodium that they've been eating, how much water they've been drinking, exactly down to the very last detail. And so it's really helpful for a provider to be able to say, oh, okay, well, I can see exactly what's happening here because, you know, your blood pressure is this and we need to fix this medication. So, you know, otherwise it's sometimes just a shot in the dark. So, my favorite people.
And I'll just give this plug. I love that you said that, but some people will listen to this. And if you know some engineers, it is such a two-edged sword because engineers can be very on top of things and they take notes, and we have to take notes legally. If you work with government stuff, your notes can become government property if you're working on a project. But also engineers can be the most fucking scatterbrained people you've ever thought of because they focus on these things, but they don't think big picture with common sense. I've run into that a lot, and I've had to try to be very balanced in my workplace. So I love that you said that. But my husband, who also grew up in construction, will tell me, like, I can't believe that my wife is a fucking engineer, because I grew up hating them. Because as a construction worker, you're just like, this is how you build a house. And they're like, oh no, but the angle of this, and oh, if we just, anyways, I digress. Love that you said that. But getting back to, yes, I had two points. The first was, yes, that line from the song Reap What I Sow. And that song is very important to me. And it's a special song because sometimes you can spend a week or a month writing a song. For me, songwriting happens in that I have to compartmentalize things. In my head, it's like a big library. And I'll be driving in the car and a melody comes to my head. And I just think, God damn, like that's catchy. I got to save that one. And I'll compartmentalize it. And I'll just think, I don't have a song for that yet, but one day. And other times lyrics come to me and I'll write it on a sticky note or somewhere. Most of my songs are actually in the back of all of my engineering notebooks. Like one day I'll just sell my mathematical equations and notes that also have song lyrics on them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but Reap What I Sow was different. Because like I said, in other experiences, there's these magical moments where I will come up with a lyric and I just know internally the melody for that is what I compartmentalized last July on the 4th. It's in my notes. Let me go to my phone and take out the voice recording. But Reap What I Sow was different because we were in the studio recording and we had 4 days to record this album. It was like a one-time shot. Musicians were all free. The studio we booked, and there was pressure to get it done in that time. And it was the day before the last day in the studio. And the last track was actually supposed to be a cover of one of my favorite artists, Brandi Carlile, who has a song called Whatever You Do. And that song has been my mantra for my entire singing career. It's the song that really started my first thoughts of maybe I could be a songwriter, maybe I can tell my story in music. So the last song was going to be a tribute to her by singing a cover of Whatever You Do, which I invite people to go listen to. If you're an ex-Mormon, that song will speak to you. If you've ever had to leave family or loved ones behind and start a new life, the main lyric is, I love you whatever you do, but I have a life to live too. Anyways, so we were in the kitchen and the boys were all sitting down. I had made them spaghetti and we were all eating dinner. And I said, okay, I'm going to put on this song for you. This is what we're going to record tomorrow in the studio. And they were like, cool. So I put the song on and it started playing and I went to the kitchen to dish up more spaghetti. And I looked through there's like a little window way, and I saw the guy sitting there and the song started playing. And I struggle with emotions. I don't feel them too often unless I'm songwriting. And that's something that I'll also talk about later in this podcast. But I started crying like uncontrollably. I couldn't even be in the room. I looked out and I saw this band, these musicians that I had put together, that we were doing this project. And I just thought, like, I am doing this. I'm fucking doing this. And I'm succeeding. Like, I did leave the church and I did find real love and real friendships. And look at this band and look at what we're recording. And, you know, my engineering career and everything that I wanted to that I set out to do, I'm doing it. And I was overwhelmed and I went up to the shower and then I was crying in the shower. My husband comes up. He's like, are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. Just leave me.
That's such an amazing story.
And so I left and I just said, I just need to be alone. And it was like midnight at this point. We had to be in the studio the next day. And I was alone and I sat down with my journal and I wrote the song Reap What I Sow that night at midnight before our last day in the studio. And I wrote it and I just knew, like, this is my ending for this album. However, when you listen to it from an artistic standpoint, it's the same chords that are used in Brandi Carlile's song, Whatever You Do. And at the end, there's this big note where I swell and I hit this high note and I'm like yelling and it goes off into the distance. And that's exactly what happens in Brandi Carlile's song. So I got to write my own story, my own version of Whatever You Do. And I got to pay tribute to this artist that I love. But it was the perfect ending for me for this album. So that's the story of Reap What I Sow.
So can I ask you, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. You wrote this song the night before you recorded it. So you basically had no time to practice or like perfect it. This just,
oh yeah,
that is phenomenal. And that's kind of one of those serendipitous moments where, you know, it's deep truth, right? It just came right out of you without any effort, without, not that you didn't work hard on it, but I mean, you weren't struggling. It just came to you. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yep. And there are certain songs for me that happens. And those songs I always hold dear because that doesn't happen all the time. You know, music is something you have to work at, but there are certain songs where the emotion just pours from you. And the boys woke up the next morning and I just said, hey, remember that song I played for you last night? We're not doing it, but here's the song we're going to do. I'm going to play it for you. And I sat them down on the couch and I played it for them on my acoustic guitar. And they were just like, all right, let's do it.
That's so awesome.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. So anyways, going on from my point of what that song is, the other point I wanted to make was Kendra was talking about, or perhaps it was you, Christina, the educational standpoint, right? That your entire worldview changes. And I just wanted to second that, but I don't think a lot of people understand it's not just your religious viewpoint that changes. It's your entire world. History, science, philosophy, ethics, anything. I used to come home from school as a child, and I remember one time my father saying, you need to unlearn everything from school and I will reteach it to you through the lens of the gospel, because you're being taught of the world and you must be taught correctly. Which is very powerful for a child to think that when they go to school and learn, what they're learning is not correct. It's just kind of a worldly view of education, you know? Yeah, so, and I did have that outlook on school as a child growing up, that my teachers were there to teach me. However, everything was with a grain of salt, right? I couldn't take anything they said seriously because I had to fact check with Mormon history and Mormon doctrine, views of the Mormon world. And people are always so amazed when I explain, no. Like, Christopher Columbus only sailed across the ocean and found the Americas because Joseph Smith needed to be here on this continent to start the Mormon religion. We only won the Revolutionary War because God guided the founding fathers to win so that Joseph Smith could be in New York for the gold plates. And like the obsession of Mormons to have a picture of George Washington in their home. Like, you know, that picture of him kneeling, praying.
Yeah, I do. Well, so many people.
Yeah. Also, the internet was created for the church to further the gospel. Have you heard that one? The internet was not for everybody. It was because the church needed to further the gospel.
Because every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. And that can only happen if we have the internet to spread the gospel to all of these people. Yes, I was also taught that.
except I don't think they counted on just how much people were going to learn from the internet.
It destroyed them. I know. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like you said, Kendra, it's not just a change of religion. My entire viewpoint of history changed. My entire viewpoint of science. Science only existed to prove that God exists. You know, when we learn about world creation, or even, there is a differentiating standpoint on people that believe in evolution and people that don't within the church. However, if you do believe in evolution, I would always explain to people, yeah, God used evolution to get to the point where he could put a spirit into a body. And anything that science discovered always had to be twisted to a means to an end that fit into the Mormon world plan of salvation. And oftentimes, when you already see something and you already have the end, and you create it to be a means to that end, you miss everything the science is trying to tell you. And
yeah,
so
you not only miss it, but I think that just as important, besides missing everything that the science is trying to tell you, I think there seems to be this general lack of care as well, because the end has already been determined. So we don't, like, all the stuff in the middle doesn't really matter. Like I never cared about the planet and things like that, because, well, the apocalypse is coming and everything's coming to an end and Jesus is coming and we'll live in the millennium and it'll all get worked out. So why do I need to be concerned about world hunger and the state of the planet and all these things? Because everything's already been predetermined, and it just completely stifles anyone's ability to openly understand and learn all these things.
Yep. Or people, science discovering other galaxies or places. And you're like, of course there's other galaxies, because when I grow up, I'm going to be a goddess married to a god that's going to have their own planet. And there's so many planets, because we're all just, going to get our own planet and have our own little
Not
world
anymore.
And then repeat the plan of salvation.
Not anymore. Don't you know that they took back that doctrine?
I know that they did, but also it's just like, oofda. You can't take back something that one of the earlier prophets said. Like, you can't teach that as doctrine for forever. And then just say, ooh, sorry. They made a Mormon Broadway show about us. We're going to take this back.
But they do it all the time, right? And they say that it's new revelation. It's very convoluted.
Yeah. And also, I think that is a struggle for me when I describe things to people is, I don't think you understand the Mormonism I grew up in. The church has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to whitewash themselves and recreate a new face, a new name, which you're all aware of. But the doctrine I grew up with and that I knew to be true, which they can never take back. That's the one thing that scientifically or historically, if you have a date and you have a newspaper article or you have a writing or you have something like facts, that is something that the Mormon church can never undo. Historically, even if what Joseph Smith said was going on in an area, you can pinpoint everything going on in surrounding dates of neighborhood newspapers, and history has been recorded. You cannot take it back. And I love that they're kind of stuck in their own web when it comes to that. But the whole rebranding thing is very smart on their end, but that does not make them any less damaging, gaslighting, or evil,
Well, they have to figure out how to spend their money, right? Between building temples and rebranding and whatever else that they need to do to spend that money, so it's not showing up as something that's against their tax exempt status.
Yeah. Yep. For sure, because it is first and foremost a business.
Right. It's a corporation. I think this has been the first time I've we just had general conference this last weekend. And this is the first time I haven't paid any attention to any of it or looked up anything. I just didn't have any desire to have any part of it. But in my news feed, I see people posting things, and I think they announced like 18 more temples when we know that the church membership is dwindling.
Yeah,
and
and they
again,
haven't even built half the ones they said they were going to build like 5 years
right.
ago. Yeah.
Exactly. And I say all the time, I think it's because that's where they have so much money now, because they're this multi-billion-dollar organization that it's kind of, I compare them to Scientology sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You'll hear Scientologists speak all the time about how they have these like elaborate buildings that sit empty because they have to put their money somewhere in order to keep their tax exempt status. And so they put it into real estate because then they're saying it's still within the church / corporation. And yeah. I'm actually wondering, I feel like that's what the church is doing now. They've got so much money in the coffers, and that in order to keep their status, they've got to put it into something. And so like they just keep building these temples with these super elaborate marble floors and chandeliers and just pouring money into these buildings. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, there's a reason why I did attend BYU, and I attended for a year, went on my mission, came back, and was in my 3rd semester whenever I was leaving Mormonism. Thank goodness I left, so I don't have to have BYU on my resume.
I say that all the time.
Oh, yeah. Because even when you get into what BYU is as an institution, like they are under I forget what education system they're under for their collegiate.
I think is it Title IX? Is that what it is that you're thinking of?
Regardless, basically, if you read between the lines, like they get to check off their own curriculums. Like they're a part of the system, but also as a church organization, like they get to make their own rules of what their curriculum is. And I try to explain that to people too. I'm like, yeah, BYU is one of the #1 business schools, which is why the church is so good at business. But also, like, if you went to lectures, like my geology professor taught us that, you know, we have all of these different rocks on the planet and we'll study them. However, there is a theory from a prophet that, you know, dinosaur bones are only here because God used rocks from different planets to make this Earth. So dinosaurs might not have actually been here. It was from other planets. And, you know, just random stuff like that I took seriously. These were not just professors, but even more so, these were priesthood holders that were worthy and had spiritual knowledge to tell me these things. So I wasn't learning educational, scientific things. I was, once again, learning everything through the lens of the church. And you're taught to be so happy about it because you have the truth. You have the real knowledge. No one else at any other university is getting this divine information, when really your education sucks. Like,
yeah, no,
you shouldn't even laugh about that.
It's so true. I think recently there was somebody had leaked or taken photos of an anatomy and physiology book that was being used at BYU. And they literally had like blurred out or erased the genitalia.
Yeah.
Because how do you take an anatomy and physiology class
and not understand how your vagina or penis works? I'm sorry.
Exactly.
You're all about procreating life and having all these babies. You better understand how it fucking works. Yeah.
Pun intended, right?
Mm-hmm. Ha, yes, absolutely.
See what you did there?
Yes. Yeah, whenever I was in school, and at the time I was talking with my husband, now husband, I was in an ecology class. My first major was in ecology. My husband just so happens to be an ecologist. That's what his Bachelor of Science is in before his philosophy degree. And I had my phone on like a phone call. I was recording the class and I just had them on mute. My husband and another educated ecologist, and they were listening into my class. And at the end, I left the class and they called me and they said, "What the hell did we just listen to? We both have degrees from different universities and went through, a normal educational system. That was not ecology. That was the most pitiful lecture, twisted knowledge I've ever heard." Like, they were fuming. I have never known, especially this other ecologist that was with my husband, I've never known him to be like a pissed off, angry person. And he was so mad at the way this lecture was being presented, because from a real educational standpoint, what they teach at BYU, it is not a real education.
No, it's not.
But at the same time, they are breeding these like soldiers, right? Mm-hmm. Their mantra is not, "We will give you the best education." Their literal mantra is, "You will come here and you will leave a better converted Mormon."
Yep, 100%.
Their goal is not education. And anyone else can see that.
Mm-hmm. Something you said about Mormons. That's okay. No worries. Something you said about Mormons being good business people. I've decided that it's not so much that they're good business people, but I was told from the time I was young that that organizations, corporations, bosses, they all like Mormons to be their employees because Mormons make good employees. Because they're honest and trustworthy and, all these things that are part of the articles of faith.
They speak different languages because they went on missions,
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. But what I've come to realize, though, is that they are not actually good, honest people who hold integrity. What the reality is that I see is that they are super obedient, that they are strictly obedient to their employer, and they will do the bidding of their employer, even if it goes against their intuition, even if it goes against that internal feeling of, this doesn't feel right. I feel like something else should happen here. They will do really horrible things to be able to uphold their corporation, just like the LDS Church. They do horrible things to each other. And, so I think that actually it's not so much that they're good workers. It's that they just don't even ask questions. They don't critically think for themselves, and they just follow blindly.
Yep. And to add to that, we became extremely good manipulators to make said obedience happen. That was something I learned on my mission. Even with the glasses on in Mormon vision, tunnel vision world. I served my mission in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, in Central America. And it was a very poor, rough mission. I have lots of stories and lots of things that I could say about that. But for this conversation, I will say that even as a Mormon, I understood that I was not there to just be a representative of Jesus Christ. I was there to be a part of the business, because it was a very strict, you will write down how many people you talked to. At the end of the day, you report who you talked to, where you went, what lessons did you teach, and did you write down in your carpeta or your like a binder the details of who did you visit. Oh, Hermana Maria, did she have a daughter that died? Did she have a husband that died? What's her story? Write it all down, every single detail, so that the next person that can go to the house can understand exactly who she is and manipulate her.
Right. They play on their grief.
The Spirit told me to teach you lesson number 2, which is the plan of salvation. Well, no, duh. If you have a mother that had a child that died and you told her about the plan of salvation, how she could be with her family for forever, that is the most manipulative, cruel thing you can do.
Yep.
But
It's terrible.
but it is normal. And
Well,
you're so brainwashed into that.
We learn to
I feel
manipulate
like it's not.
ourselves also. We learn to manipulate and gaslight ourselves into believing the things that don't make sense and believing the things that we're taught in, whether it's in BYU or the gospel or the world through the lens of the gospel. We learn how to gaslight ourselves into believing those things so that we can maintain our eternal family.
Yep.
Well, and what you were saying about, you understood that you were not just there to be a representative of Jesus, you were a representative of the corporation. This is no different. And I think they call it ministering now. When I was in the church, it was mostly known as visiting teaching and home teaching. It's the same thing. You have to report your numbers at the end of every month. And this created so much dissonance for people, myself included, which is why I never participated in visiting teaching, because it just felt so wrong to me. But, this secretary would call at the end of the month. Hi, can you report your numbers? Or you'd get the people that would call to make appointments on the 25th or the 28th of the month. Oh, hey, can we come see you before the end of the month? Because they had to check a box. It was always a box because they wanted to keep people in line. They say it's because we love you and we want to check in with you and make sure everybody's doing okay. But really, the sense I got was, we want to check to make sure that you're towing the line and staying active, because we got to keep you in here, because if we lose you, those are dollar signs going out the door.
Yep. And they do an incredible job in the MTC. For those of you that don't know what that is the Mission Training Center that they send you to right before you go to whatever country your mission is in. And did either of you serve a mission?
Neither of us did, no.
Okay. So
no.
In the MTC, I can now look back with the 2020 vision I have and understand their perfectly calculated program to send these teenagers in there, mostly men, full of testosterone, thinking they are just the fucking shit. And they're going to go on this mission and work miracles. And even the girls, there is this hierarchy of, I'm a girl and I'm going to go serve a mission. So when I get back, I am husband material. I am a step above all the other girls because I'm doing this. It's totally implanted in you from a young age. If you serve a mission, you are higher up on the totem pole for sure. And so you go in there and you are young, impressionable minds, but only impressionable to your abuser, which is the church. So you go in there and there is a rigorous schedule for you to follow of, you will go from this class to here to language. And then at the end of the day, once we have exhausted you with information, we will sit you in an auditorium where we will play a very manipulative talk from an apostle or a prophet. And we will make sure that at the end of it, you are all feeling these emotions and your exhaustion will turn into ego, pride of, you are the chosen ones, you are the soldiers, and only you can do this mission. And it turns from exhausted, broken down teenage minds into brainwashed soldiers that are being sent out with this mantra, I have the power. And that is one of the most destructive things you can do to a young mind, is to break you down and know that you are only powerful as long as you are a medium of your abuser. And that is what the MTC was. And it makes me angry to talk about it.
And you're right. It's brilliant of them and it's really smart. And there's a reason why they get these people in here when they're young, because you get guys, they can go at 18 now. We know for a fact that brain development is not complete at the age of 18. Brain development, frontal lobe of the brain continues to develop into the 20s. So if we can get these kids in here while their brains are still developing and really upload this message, it sticks. And I think they've done statistics on it, that people that serve missions typically, statistically speaking, will stay in the church longer than people that haven't served missions. And so you get them in there, you get this message implanted. And you're right. It's brilliant, and it's very cult-like, and it's all about making these kids believe they're special. I mean, I think those of us that are older, it doesn't matter if you're in your 50s, 40s, 60s, 30s, it doesn't matter. Every one of us, our generation was told we were the chosen ones. We'd been saved for the last days. We're the youth of when we were in the youth program, we're the chosen youth. It was all about us. You get kids to believe that when their brains are still developing, then you've got them,
Yep.
Yeah.
And even, were you going to say something, Kendra? And then I'll say my thought.
Yeah, I was just thinking also. So when my daughter went, she actually went to Hawaii on her mission, and before she went, there's so much shame in the church for not doing exactly what the prescribed plan is. So people who don't go on a mission, men specifically who don't go on a mission, are not marriage material. Like you were saying, the women that go on a mission and complete their mission are women, or are women who are desired to be married to, because they're going to be faithful to this religion for the rest of their lives, or that's what the assumption is. But my daughter came home from her mission early because she had broken her ankle, and
so much shame.
Yes,
you broke your ankle?
Yeah.
You could have stayed.
You could have stayed.
Yeah.
And there was so much abuse from her, anyway, that's her story to tell. But coming back, it reminds me of when my kids didn't go on their missions. My boys and my other daughter not going on missions, or not wanting to stay in the church. And the grief that I felt as a mother is kind of like the shame that you feel when you come back from your mission, or just the feeling that you are not good enough, or that you messed something up, that you fucked up your kids, that they it was your fault, this is all on you. And as a mother, or as the person who comes home, well, if I had just been watching, I wouldn't have tripped on a rock, or if I had taken care of my health before I left for my mission, then I wouldn't be sick now. Having an appendicitis or having a broken ankle are things that are outside of their control. But the church holds them hostage, though, and I'd like to hear from you what you think about this. But from what I understand, the church takes the passport away, and as adults, that's a hostage situation where you have no power, no money, no identification to take with you, because what do they want to do? They want to discourage you from leaving, and asking for a passport back, or asking for the money that your family is sending you. They distribute it to you as though you're children, but they send you on a mission as an 18-year-old, as an adult, but they still treat you like children. And if they didn't keep you hostage there by holding on to your livelihood, the way that you can support yourself, or the way that you can feed yourself, or the way that you can get back home, how is that not considered a hostage situation for every single person who leaves the country and can't take their passport with them? The missionaries who can't go home, who want to go home, they can't go home.
Well,
their
legally,
family will not. Their family will not let them
kidnapping.
Come home. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you withhold like that, I think that legally that falls under kidnapping. Like, they technically could get charged with kidnapping. Now, outside the country, they probably have protections because they're not under U.S. law, whatnot. I don't know, but
yeah. I am glad you asked, Kendra, because I have a shit ton to say about that.
I love it.
Yeah, so if I back up a little bit, when I was in the MTC, and picture this, let me get very personal about who I was at that time and what my identity was. I came from a very small branch out in Illinois. We were the only branch in the state. very small, and therefore way more cult-like. It was a tiny community. I was the only true faithful Mormon my age in school. I was going to bring the gospel to everyone. I was going to be this beacon. And that was my sole identity. And I was very good at it. And I went out to BYU, and all of a sudden, I hated being there. My identity meant nothing. Everybody else was just like me. And so I had to develop a different new identity that made me different than any other pretty Mormon girl there looking for a husband. I just wanted to be unique. So I joined the BYU women's rugby team, and I drove a motorcycle out there. I didn't own a car. I was a motorcycle chick. So there I was, and there's all these beautiful, dyed hair, gorgeous, same outfits. They all shop at the same Deseret place. Girls looking for husbands. And there I was, driving my motorcycle to church in a dress, in heels. And I'd get off, and it would just be this vibe of like, don't fuck with me. Like, I am not like every other girl here that showed up in their group of 10, talking about their favorite cute
That's
Peter
awesome.
Priesthood that they saw in Sunday school. I'd be like, no, I'm fucking here. And then that became my identity. I was kind of an egotistical brat, but my tough guy motorcycle, I was on the rugby team. I hung out with my rugby teammates. That became my identity. And you would not recognize me. Like you guys can see me now. And if you go on my Instagram, I've worked very hard on my new identity and who I am. I have short blonde hair. I have continued my workout regime, and I craft my look now. But at the time, I had long brown hair that was always in a braid. I was on my motorcycle, total lesbian material. And which, by the way, everyone, call a spade a spade. My teammates always asked me, like, they'd hint at me being a lesbian, and I'm so bisexual. I'm very into women. Like, that's if I could look back and tell myself, oh honey, just accept it.
That's awesome.
But anyway, so this was the identity I built. And in my mission papers, for those that do not know, you fill out your papers, you send it to the church, and the higher ups will choose where you go. And it's supposed to be divine destiny, that this is the mission you go to. And I put on my mission papers, at the very end, they say, is there anything you would like to tell the apostles or the brethren? And literally what I wrote to the apostles was, I am an ox. Put me to work. That was what I wrote.
Wow.
Oh, no.
And yeah, so none of the, I have, these health problems, or I'd prefer to learn this language, or yet I was just like, put me to fucking work. I will outwork any girl that you put into the mission. And so they sent me to Honduras, and my mission president read that line, and him and his wife actually messaged me ahead of time saying, we read your mission papers, and we are so impressed with what you wrote at the end. Like, we are so excited to put you to work. And that made me feel so special. So anyways, so I enter the MTC with this mantra of, I am the toughest. I will take the most, anything that God throws at me. Like, I'm ready. I remember running laps around a track before I left on my mission, and I'm sweating and I'm listening to some intense music. And I remember, this sounds so crazy to say, but like, I remember dreaming of terrible things happening to me and me being so proud that I could take it. And looking back, they were very tame things that I was imagining. But then I went to the MTC, and then I was brainwashed even more. And I was probably different from a lot of the girls there because I did have this very almost boy-like intensity of being powerful and the strength you feel in being important and chosen. You know, I was there to outwork the guys.
Can,
And
can I ask you a question
yeah,
about that?
yeah.
Did you find that did you find that the elders, the guys, were they intimidated by you because of that?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I specifically wore my BYU women's rugby jacket around. I would specifically go to the weight room and lift in front of the elders because I could lift quite a bit at the time, because I
That's
had been
awesome.
training with the rugby people. And I would like be on the treadmill and I would be grunting and and anything I could do. Intimidation was a huge thing for me at the time, which I haven't thought
Yeah.
about until you asked that question. But yes.
Yeah. That's
I would arm
interesting.
wrestle them on my lunch breaks, like anything to just
Wow. Show them who's boss.
yeah. Which psychologically, if you delved into that, there's some fucked up things behind that. However, moving forward with my story to answer Kendra, I was in the MTC and I had been all through all this brainwashing, and I was already there under the pretense that I wanted to be the best and I wanted to outwork everyone. And then my mother sent me a letter, and it was my last week in the MTC. And for those of you that don't know, you are cut off from all communication with your family or friends. You can only email them or receive letters once a week for 1 hour. No other communication, which is a part of the brainwashing. But I remember vividly, I remember exactly where I was sitting next to my companion. And my mother sent me an email, and in her letter she said, she acknowledged that I was going to, at the time, it had previously been one of the murder capitals of the world. It was a very dangerous place I was going. And she said, I know you'll face all these trials and tribulations and stuff. And she said, like Esther, if you perish, you perish. And she went on to instill that, you know, she would miss me, but she would be proud of me if I died on my mission. And I remember reading it, and instead of the natural feelings that any normal girl would have felt, my mom is willing to sacrifice me for this organization. Quite literally, if she was put in the place of Abraham, she would not hesitate to plunge the knife into me as Isaac. I mean nothing to her in comparison with her God, with her religion, with her perfect family that she wants. I am a means to an end. I am the sheep that she would tie up and burn as a sacrifice and kill for her God. That is what I was being told. But I read it, and I was filled with pride. My mother was the most faithful to be so willing to sacrifice a child, and how honorable that I was this child that got to prove to my mother that I would give everything. I turned to my companion and I read her the email with pride. And with that, the next week I was sent off into Honduras. And I, gaming wise, I leveled up. I was not just there anymore to outwork everybody else and be more obedient. I was there to give everything. And so that's, a lot of my mission and what my stories are and where I went and what I saw is that I was willing to go to the deepest, darkest places that I knew were dangerous, but I didn't care. And I was made a senior companion. I was made a trainer like 4 months in. I barely knew Spanish, but I was training. And so I was the senior companion who still really doesn't know. Like, I'm fluent, but there are some words you don't know. And
Well, because it didn't really matter, right? Because
I had no fear.
in you, they had the perfect, obedient, sacrificial missionary. So
Yep.
you played right into what they wanted.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes my story psychologically so interesting to analyze, is because I do feel that, a lot of kids go on missions because it's expected of them and they're just trying to go with the flow. And there's a lot of missionaries that are very faithful and obedient, but there isn't this edge. I was a clinical case. Like, you could put me in some psychology psycho ward lab and analyze me, because I am exactly what the church wanted me to be, to a very extreme level.
Irene, are you familiar with the term scrupulosity?
I heard you say it in your podcast, and I had never heard the word before. Would you please describe it again?
Yeah, so scrupulosity is a form of religious obsessive compulsive disorder, religious OCD. And when people have scrupulosity, they have a lot of anxiety around perfectionism within their religion, to the extent that it takes over their whole lives. So they will, for example, spend inordinate amounts of time repenting because
Yes.
they're afraid that if they don't repent for every little thing they do, they're going to be held accountable for these things, down to the very thoughts that we think. And so I interviewed somebody yesterday and we talked just a little bit about this thought thing, where we didn't even ever I didn't feel like I ever even had any privacy in my life, because even if I was in my own bedroom with my door closed, God could still hear all my thoughts. And so if I had some like negative thought about somebody or about someone in the church or about some doctrine, it was an immediate sense of, I have to repent for that because God can hear my thoughts and I'll be held accountable for that. And the problem is that this is a never-ending cycle, because in the church, we're taught repeatedly over and over and over again, you can't be perfect. Perfectionism is not possible because we're here living a mortal existence. That's why Jesus came, because you can't be perfect. But at the same time, we're told in all the talks and all the scriptures, be ye therefore perfect, like your Father in heaven is imperfect.
A commandment, 3rd Nephi. Yep.
Exactly. And so it's this dichotomy all the time of being told, you can't be perfect, you can't be perfect, you can't be perfect. But you must try to be perfect until the day that you die. We know that it's unattainable, but you must try to do this thing that is unattainable, because if you die and you have sins that you haven't repented of, those are going to be held against you, and that could affect your salvation. So when you have somebody like myself, who was a black and white thinker in the extreme, I mean, extreme black and white. There was no middle ground. There was no gray area for me. It was a constant mental battle all the time.
Yep. And I love that you said that. I wrote down a couple of points. First and foremost, that word scrupulosity. I had never heard of that, and you mentioned it in your podcast, and it floored me to finally hear a word that describes exactly what I was. From a child, from my childhood, I remember I had not turned 8 years old yet, And I remember going behind my father's maroon armchair in the living room and sitting behind the chair with my stuffed animals. And every Sunday I'd come home from church and I would pray with my entire little 7-year-old heart that either A, the second coming would happen, because if the second coming happened before I turned 8, which is the age of baptism when you're accountable for your sins, if the second coming could just happen then I was free, right? We entered the new age of, the second coming, and I would not be held accountable for my sins. That was the first option. And I would specifically pray that he would come down to my backyard because I wanted to be the first to sit on his lap. Option 2 was that I died before I was 8. The thoughts of death.
And this is something that's coming from a 7-year-old child.
Yes. The maturity level that I was forced to face at such a young age, to understand that I would be held accountable at 8 years old. So the options were to get out of that: A, Jesus comes, or B, I die. And I think horrifying. From a young age, that is horrifying. And I would just like to point out really quick, this is why the church is evil. This is why my parents were monsters for letting this happen in their home. Because at the same time this is happening, I am being sexually abused by a priesthood holder. My younger sister is being sexually abused by a priesthood holder. And I'm sitting behind a chair praying for my death.
This is child abuse.
Yeah. But to an outside perspective, the home I grew up in was a perfect, beautiful Mormon family. 5 children, textbook, family home evening, read our scriptures, went to church. And because it was a branch, my father was very deep doctrine, old doctrine. My childhood goals were not like most any other child's. My New Year's resolutions would be to read every general conference talk in existence. I would set Jeffrey R. Holland as my ringtone on my phone so that I was constantly reminded that the apostles were here giving revelation. The pictures in my locker at school were of Jesus Christ in the second coming. So every time I opened my locker, I'd be reminded. You talk about scrupulosity and about repentance, the obsession to repent.
Yep.
I, to the normal eye, was a wonderful golden child, which I discuss in my song Mother's Day. We will talk about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, at some point, can we please, I'm begging you to talk about that song, because that's the song that I have had on repeat, and I've listened to it over and over for hours on end, because I will talk about it. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
I wrote it down.
Going.
We will not forget.
Okay.
So, but from a young childhood age, repentance was huge for me. And in school, I fought very hard to, again, have this identity of participating in everything I could. I was captain of the soccer team, class president, drum major for the band, anything and everything to appear and be normal to my classmates, but also with the intention of converting them once I, was in their circles. And behind that, I was very abusive to myself. I remember laying in the rain, praying that I would get pneumonia as punishment for one of my sins. I remember beating walls until my knuckles bled, thinking maybe this is enough to physically show God that I am sorry. I remember running laps and forcing myself to puke. Anything to physically, spiritually, mentally make repentance happen in my life. and I was addicted to it. That is something that I have been talking about a lot, is the addiction that happens. Once you have this dopamine, these receptors, that when you repent and there is this high, this this feeling that it is quite literally like receiving a drug. Chemically, your brain gives you the drug of dopamine once you reach these extreme levels of thought.
Because it's like God himself is saying, I forgive you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you are told, I mean, how many times were we taught of godly anger or godly sorrow or godly forgiveness? There is a term for the way that you feel once you have reached this level. And for me, from a very, very young age, because I was told, I remember being one of my earliest memories is my mother taking me aside from my siblings after we were watching some movie or something, and I had to leave the room because it was too much for me. Like somebody was either kissing or something, some bad word was said. And I remember her pulling me aside and saying my name and saying, "You are different from your siblings. You feel the Spirit more. The Spirit touches you." And from that second, I was separated. And I was told, "You are a peacemaker. Your role in the home is to be this." And so that separation, from a very young age, I would seek out the extreme emotions because that was my confirmation that I was special. And so this cycle of repentance and of making myself feel like the epitome of self-destruction, only to know that after that in the cycle came the high, the unquenchable thirst for the love and acceptance I would feel from God once I reached that level. And so going forward in my life, zooming forward to my mission, now I'm in a place where not only are there extremes for me to touch, I'm literally sitting in the murder capital of the world with men threatening to rape me every day and entering the homes of men who just got out of prison for, beating their wives or doing whatever. And here I was, I'm going to give you the message. I'm going to change your life. And I sought out those experiences and I made them happen because I needed that extreme. I was searching for death. I wanted to be raped and cast to the side of the street. I remember one man threatening to rape me and cut me into a million pieces and leave my body in the ditch. And that excited me.
Well, because then you get to be a martyr for God, right? It's like the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah. I was a psychopath, quite literally. And I was willing to put my companions in whatever danger necessary, to complete these tasks. But I think the point where I truly broke was going through these extremes over and over again, like an addict. You can only take so much heroin before you overdose and you're done, you're broken. And for me, it was not the physical portions that broke me. I could have kept going with whatever mosquito disease, sickness, bacteria infection. My body was so broken on my mission. I looked like you wouldn't even recognize me in a picture. But that didn't matter to me. What broke me was that these spiritual highs and obedience, exact obedience that I was under, caused me to reach a level where eventually I broke and I didn't feel anything. There was no more extreme because I had touched the extreme of all extremes, which is the willingness to commit suicide for a cause, to be a
Mm-hmm.
martyr.
Mm-hmm.
I had already reached that state mentally. So what was left?
Right. Yeah.
And so I went home and, I had written these incredible letters on my mission home and, oh, come speak here and go to this ward and speak at this stake event and speak to the kids in this stake conference. And I'd go and I could just feel the emptiness inside of me and this facade. And I would give these talks and I'd teach these lessons at youth conferences and I'd make the kids cry. And they'd come up to me and say, I was on the fence about serving a mission, but oh, now. And, I could still do it, but I just felt so empty inside. I didn't feel the emotions anymore. And that was a huge changing point for me that prepared me to start the thought process once I met my now husband.
Mm-hmm.
When he first questioned me, I was ready to start thinking outside of that black and white world, which Kendra, I loved that you said that, or maybe it was Christina, that the world was black and white, which is why the lyric in Reap What I Sow says, I don't believe in saints. I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life. It's like gray in the winter. Because truly it was a black and white world. And coming out from that was so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the comparison of an addict. Truly, that's what I was. It's what I still am. Once you're an addict, you are an addict for the rest of your life. And I still fight those emotions or lack of emotions that I feel, which is why songwriting is so important for me, because that is one of the only ways that I can really get emotions out at this point. Otherwise, I'm a stone of a human being. And this identity project that I have started comes from a song that I wrote called Identity. And in it, the phrase in the chorus says, what do you do when you realize you're an addict, ripped away from the needle inside your veins? I spent my whole life trying to break through the haze, but the poison remains. Even when you leave heroin or you leave, any other drug or addiction behind, the poison remains in that you are chemically changed to crave that drug. In this case, this emotion or the habits that I picked up. And I think we all developed different addictions, but essentially we were addicted to the church. We were addicted to being told what to do. We were addicted to obedience, to the happiness that we were told to feel, the joy we were told to feel, the sadness and the repentance we were told to feel. And the identity project has become me asking other women, what was your addiction? What was your identity? What were you told to be? And who are you now? Post Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or Scientology. It's open to any woman of any religion. Who are you now? Because it is so important to recognize that we leave broken. We leave addicts. And my goal is to be able to pinpoint these stories in a way where it is almost like scientific data.
It is actually.
Yeah. Pinpointing.
It's very much like a form of qualitative research, right? I wondered, since you're speaking on that, if you would give an overview of this identity project that you're speaking about. It's a phenomenal project.
Yes, thank you. The identity project started, like I said, I had written this song But my goal is not to be a superstar with music. There's a lot of pretty girls out there that can write lyrics and sing. And I know that. My power and my empowerment comes from who I choose to be post-Mormonism, leaving a place where I was never going to get an education. I'll be the first one in my family to hold a degree, let alone a master's. I should be specific. I am finishing my mechanical engineering degree as I work in aerospace as an engineer, which is kind of, it's not me bragging about myself. I became like the lead of a project for one of the leading helicopter companies in the country. And I was put in that situation because we had an engineer quit. And even though I was still a student, they asked me to run it. And I did. And I was successful. And I could only do that because of this fire within me, this burning desire to prove that I was smart and I was an educated woman and I could do this. I was never going to get an education. So I will be the first one to hold a degree. And for me, my empowerment comes from the fact that I left this place and I decided to create and craft a new world where I was in control. I am self-sufficient. I am not codependent.
Mm-hmm.
I am smart. I can be a rocket scientist. I can be a rock star. I can be anything I fucking want to be. And I want other women to be able to describe these opportunities and to inspire them to understand that you can do whatever you want to do and you can recover from this addiction and you can become whatever the hell you want to become. And let me stand as an example for you that you can do that. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to be that. But the identity project, let me circle back before I rant. The identity project.
Ranting's okay too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The identity project is my way of saying, okay, ladies, let's tell our stories and let's pinpoint them in a way where when someone asks the question, was it really that bad? You say, actually, yes, here is a library of women from across the country and the world that are writing letters that have never met each other, but we have all gone through the same experiences. And here is why scientifically we can prove the church is an abuser and we are recovering addicts. And here is our process, because each woman will process it differently as she leaves. And we come from different backgrounds and different ages. But it's so powerful to tell stories. And I also think it's very powerful to give perspective to something from different angles. We can put an object in the room, but if we're looking at it from different sides of the room, Kendra will see a different shadow from the shadow that you are seeing being cast, or the angle that I am seeing of this object's, curvature or whatever it is. And there is a meeting place for all of these experiences. And I think that it's beautiful to take letters, and specifically I asked the women to write them out by hand in their own handwriting. There is power and there is art in this technological world of saying, I am here. My hands that have lived these experiences are writing these things in my own personal handwriting. So, and it doesn't always work out. We are busy women, but for me, the letters and the art behind the letters and the handwriting, as well as the fact that I have commissioned an ex-Mormon artist to create art to represent the letters.
And it's phenomenal.
So you are seeing this letter through the perspective of the person writing it, You are now seeing it from the perspective of an artist who read the letter and creates artwork for it. And I have also lined up either religious trauma therapists or educated therapists who I read the letters with, and we discuss through my lens how I relate to the letters, and from an educational standpoint, what these letters mean. So you're now getting personal perspective, artistic perspective, educational perspective, and eventually the entire point of building this foundation is that I will release my next album and be able to release a musical perspective of what we went through. And in this sense, create a way for anyone to view it through any window and understand. You will not be able to stand there and say, it wasn't that bad, or I don't understand where you're coming from. If you don't, take a look through another perspective, and perhaps you might. And so that's kind of what the Identity Project is. And I'd like to say in this podcast, if you're, and I hate to shut out men because I know men have their own things, but at this time it is only women. But if you are interested in writing a letter to the Identity Project, I invite you to find my Instagram, Irene's, no apostrophe, Irene's.entropy. And you can message me and I will send you the prompts and you can write a letter and I'll get you in contact with the artist I've commissioned. And I would love for you to be a part of the project. So that invitation is open.
That's awesome. I'll speak to that just a little bit and say, I took you up on your offer to do it. And it really kind of changed something inside of me. We say here that there's power in storytelling, which is why we've told our stories, why you're telling your story. There's a lot of power. And Kendra says this all the time, that there's something healing and cathartic about hearing yourself tell your own story in your own voice. It's very validating to your soul, your inner child. I took you up on this offer. I wrote my letter. I typed it at first, and then I went back as you had requested to handwrite it. And I was unprepared for the way that handwriting that letter was going to affect me, and seeing it in my own writing was going to affect me. It was very, very powerful to just allow that free flow of thought. And I'm really excited to see what the artist does with it. It's just a phenomenal project that you're undertaking that is giving this collective voice to women to validate what has happened to them.
Thank you. It's beautiful to hear you say that, because a lot of times as a creator, I do sit there and I wonder, like, is this really helping the women? What more can I do? What am I not doing? Because I want it to be successful. And that was just beautiful to hear you say that. Thank you, Christina. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I can tell you categorically, it's absolutely helping people. It's helping me even just read other people's letters and just to be able to see that visual representation with the artwork. And then to hear you sometimes on your own reels get on there and talk about your perspective on it. It's like you said, I think you said it so beautifully when you talked about seeing things from different perspectives, and like how Kendra will see the same object in a room differently because she's seeing it from a different point of view. This is so true. I think, Kendra, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what you had said about addiction. And I hadn't thought about it in that way of people being addicted to the church. But as you were talking, I started thinking about what exactly people are addicted to in the church. And I think one of the main things is that people are addicted to certainty. And they want to know that, I'm here for this purpose. I am going to do this plan, and these are the steps in this plan, and then I'm going to go to this place when I die, and I'm going to see all the people that that I lived with, all my family members when I die. And what I've learned, and I've talked to Christina about this before, is that certainty is not always beautiful. Certainty is kind of like a prison. Certainty prevents you from seeing all the possibilities because you're so tunnel vision to see exactly what the church prescribes for you to see that it's difficult for anybody to see anything outside of that as good. So uncertainty is something that, as leaving the church, you have to, or I've had to, grasp onto this uncertainty and be able to be comfortable with it, and knowing that it's okay. It's okay that I don't know where I'm going when I die. It's okay that I don't know what happens when I die. I'm okay letting go of things that really there is no certainty in, because science doesn't tell us what is certain and what's not. There's a lot of stories that tell us, but my certainty at this point and my knowledge at this point and what I follow at this point is my own intuition. And the only way for me to have done that is to let go of anything that was not authentic to me. And that means people, organizations, thought processes, things in the past. I think also so I'm going to kind of switch subjects a little bit, still about addiction, but with trauma and PTSD, it's not that we intend to be addicted to the fight or flight response, but our bodies actually just respond that way automatically. And in order to live in that fight or flight response, I feel like for me, it's been something where I've had to keep myself busy. The only way to deal with that extra energy of the adrenaline is to do something with it. And, so whether that's overachieving in some way or another, or, pushing myself to unrealistic expectations, both of which I've done, that can be considered an addiction too, because you're not getting under control the response to the bodily trauma. And by the way, this is my daughter, Miana. I didn't think she was going to be here. And this is Irene from Irene's Entropy.
I can't stay a long time, but I'm enjoying listening for now.
Okay.
But I have
Wonderful.
School.
I was very excited to meet you. I was glad when I saw you come in.
It's good to meet you too.
Thank you. Yes, there are 3 things that I now think about after both of your comments. One of which is these addictions that we have. And I think that another addiction, especially for women, for men, the addiction comes in power. You are a priesthood holder. You are special. My father was, like I said, very deep doctrine oriented, and like he had his other wives picked out for the next life. Like polygamy was alive and well, and he knew what women he wanted. He flirted shamelessly with other women. My mother would always just say, "Oh, that's just how your father is." But yes, my father was addicted to the power he got out of being a priesthood holder and holding that above my mother and my family. Women tend to become addicted to the idea of a perfect forever family, especially when your family feels so broken or you came from a broken family. The addiction of knowing if I do A, B, and C, because women, we're very good at making a list, checking things off, and like that's how our brains work. And so if I can have this list and all I have to do is, okay, family home evening on Sundays, there's mutual on Wednesdays. If I do my scripture reading with my kids every day, we'll read from the Ensign. I'll prepare these things. The talks are there, the family home evening lessons, the Sunday school things, and then I'll send my kids to these youth conferences and they'll go to the temple at this age, and here's exactly what I'm going to do, because they do busy you, Kendra. You're so right. If I'm given this list, I have a perfect forever family. What an addiction that women fall into with that.
And
And
we miss the forest for the trees, that saying. We miss the
Mhm.
beauty of everything around us because of all of the tasks that we're given. We can't even see everything for what it really is. We have to see it from the lens of a Mormon woman.
Yep. And so with that addiction from a woman's perspective, a maternal perspective, I'd like to ask you, Christina, to describe your thoughts on my song Mother's Day that I wrote, if we could circle back to that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, actually, I'm going to pull up a note on my phone because I loved the song so much that I wrote the lyrics out because I wanted to see them.
That's cool.
Let me see it. Actually, it might be here on my computer. So this song,
Can I, before you start, I do want to point
yeah,
out it's a hidden thing. I need to get my lyrics up on Apple Music and Spotify. I can do that. I'm just so
uh-huh,
busy that I haven't. But
okay,
if you go to my website, my music is there, and there's a little
mm-hmm.
music note with 3 bars behind it. And if you click on it, it shows the lyrics to every song. That's a hidden feature that almost no one
Oh,
knows about. So,
that is really good to know, and I'm absolutely going to check that out.
yeah,
So I would love to share my thoughts on this
please.
song. And when you when you first when you and I were texting back and forth trying to set up this interview and kind of sharing some thoughts with each other, you had sent me the link to the Spotify site for the song, and you warned me to have some Kleenex. Yeah, it's have a whole box, not just one. I've since attached myself. I'm a crier. I'm a very emotional person, so I'm already there. Um, this song just hit home for so many reasons for me. A little bit of background for me, and I've already told my story, so I'm not going to rehash it all. But um, just a brief little bit is that I have a child who is queer, and when my child came out, um, we had some healing to do between us. It didn't bother me that my kid was queer. I actually love that about them. They're an amazing human soul. But when I read the lyrics to your song, I wept because for a couple of reasons. Number one, I could completely feel as an empath your emotions as you sang that song and just the hurt that you felt as a child whose mother didn't accept you for the choices that you made. That was one reason that it made me emotional. And the other reason is because it drove home to me how dangerously close I could have been that mom. How dangerously close it was for me, being a Mormon woman, to have made that same decision to reject my own child, something I can't really fathom doing. I don't think it's in me. It never has been, which is why I'm out of the church now. But it just drove home to me that this seemingly impossible thing, like I could not reject my child. And yet I look around in the church and I see it happening all the time. I see mothers rejecting their kids, their perfect children, because their own choices in life don't match with theirs. And that's how when I read the lyrics to this song, it drove home to me once again how absolutely deep this brain wiring, indoctrination, and brainwashing go, because we know, even looking at the world through a scientific lens, when you look at the animal kingdom, animals protect their young to the death. If you see an animal with babies, you do not go anywhere near that animal, because that animal, it will kill you before they let you do anything to their pups or their cubs or their babies. And yet we have human parents who not only don't fight for their kids to the death, they outright reject them. They outright throw them out of the nest or the cave or the, whatever it is. And it was so powerful to me to read these lyrics. And I have this note pulled up on my computer and I'm looking at it. And if it's okay with you, if I could read some of it and comment, it's so powerful. Right at the beginning, you say, my family once called me the golden child, but now misery is all I bring to the table. I am the Cain that killed Abel. Like, you went from being this golden child to just like,
I was able. I was able. And I became Cain. And when I killed myself and left, I went, I just fell from grace. I was Cain that killed Abel.
Yeah. And then a little bit down the line, you say, once my angel, but now you fear. I am the snake that you call treason. I lead the daughters from your Eden. The imagery there is so powerful. Like, they have to be afraid of you now. You say in the words prior to that you're scared. It says, and I'm scared to take a trip because I know that I'd slip into the rubble I left behind to my weak and broken mind. You're scared to go back there because they see you as the snake. They see you as dangerous. You're the apostate that's going to lead the other kids out. So we have to keep you away.
Yeah.
And then you go on to say, you broke my heart, left me tied up at the start of the race you would not run. So I did it on my own. I hit the finish, wish I could hold you and say, I did it. What kid doesn't want that from their parent to finish that race and have their parent there at the end cheering them on? I'm here. I love you. I see you. I was just talking to someone yesterday about, they work the night shift and they're tired all the time, but they do it so that when there are school assemblies, there's always a parent that can show up at these assemblies, because even though our kids say it doesn't matter, we know it does, because every time I went to an assembly at 2 p.m. when I was dog tired, I would watch my kids and they would scan the audience. They would scan and scan and scan and make sure and as soon as they made eye contact with one of us and they knew we were there, you could just visibly see the anxiety go away, and that they felt loved because their parent was able to show up for them. So the imagery here, when you're saying like you had to do this on your own and you got to the finish and wished that your parent was there and they weren't. And then you get into this part toward the end that just sends me over the edge every time. I'm just going to read this verbatim. I hope I get it right. Very quietly, you saying, it's a good way to raise a child until it's not. And maybe somewhere down the road, you forgot that love is patient and love is kind, but love is not obedient minds. And that's so powerful, because I think so many of us, that's what we thought. It's a good way to raise a child until it's not. I wish everyone in the sound of my voice would go listen to this song. And if you are a mom or a dad that happens to be listening, that's having a hard time with maybe some of the choices your kids are making, please remember who they are. Remember that you are their parent. Remember that they are nothing but love and light. Listen to the words to this song, because when Irene sings them, you feel her pain. It comes through in her voice. It comes through in this music. And in fact, I even texted you, Irene, because I was so turned upside down by this song. And I even said, like, if you need a mom to tell you that I'm proud of you and be there at the finish line, I will be that mom for you. And I will say that to anybody else that's listening. If you need a mom They talk about the moms that go to the pride parades that wear shirts that say free mom hugs. Well, I'm giving you free mom hugs through the internet right now. If you need somebody to be there and say, I'm proud of you and I accept you for who you are, I will be that mom for you.
Thank you,
Me
Christina.
So I have to go, but I just wanted to say something before I left, kind of about what you were saying, Christina, and what you were saying a little earlier about, I don't necessarily know if you were saying the church is the addiction or if repentance is the addiction, but I think that with a lot of the parents who reject their children, I was kind of thinking about it in the way that if you did have a parent who was addicted to any sort of drug, opioids or anything, and you got them into rehab, they wouldn't instantly thank you. They're going to be mad at you for a while.
Yeah.
And if they keep going back to the addiction over and over again, then they're never going to forgive you. And if you leave the church, your family is never going to forgive you if they stay in the church, even if they say that it's okay, but most of the time I feel like they don't. And
I love that.
Just on top of all that, like I think that the biggest high for them, like why they stay in the church maybe above all else, is because how good would it feel if you brought your child back to the church after they left?
Yeah, and that's what they think they're doing. They think they're saving them.
But they can't understand that they're hurting their child, because when you're in active addiction, you're going to do whatever it takes. You're going to steal money. You're going to pawn off, your children's toys or your wedding ring or whatever. And in that active addiction state, you can't understand or comprehend how detrimental that is going to be to your relationships with your family, or how detrimental that's going to be to your own health. When you get the drug, you're just going to go back into active addiction even further, but it's chasing that high. And when this high isn't good enough, you're going to want more. And what's more than being in the church and raising your kids in the church is staying in the church and fighting tooth and nail. I feel like some people, they're more, they hold stronger to their convictions when they have people that leave. Not everyone, but some people will double down and they'll be like, okay, this person left, but if I'm stronger, then they'll come back because they'll see the light and they'll see the truth.
Very textbook thing to happen. Thank you for saying that.
And two things about that, Kendra has talked about this in the past, that when she was kind of the last man standing, the last person standing in her family, there becomes this overwhelming pressure that all of a sudden now the eternal salvation of my entire family is now on my shoulders. So yes, I've got to double down. I've got to triple down. I've got to do whatever I can within my power to like, my children are lost. And as a parent, when you think your child is lost, I can tell you, there's almost no greater fear. I mean, when you are out, even just in a department store, and you lose sight of them and they're little, every worst thought in your head comes to play. They've been kidnapped, raped, murdered. I'm never going to see them again. I've got to save them. You'll do anything. But you're right, Miana. I appreciate your perspective on addiction with this, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's also why people ask me all the time, like, how is it? Because I have a lot of compassion for people that are still on the inside, and I don't agree with what they're doing, but I have a shit ton of compassion for them because I get it. It's like we talked about at the very beginning with the lenses. They still have the lenses on. They don't know what things look like without taking those lenses off. And because this is the only perspective they have, they react in kind. And so, like we've all been saying, and just to reiterate again, you're right. It's save. We've got to bring you back. We've got to bring you back. And as a mom, those lyrics that you've written, when we were talking about, you're the snake that's leading the daughters out of Eden, it's a fear, because even though I love you and you're my child, I can't risk you dragging the other kids out, because If you're out, then I only have,
yes,
then I only have one child out. But if I let you start associating with the other kids, then I might lose all of them. It's again, I don't get ragey very often about the church. I've kind of worked through a lot of that, but this is one of those things that just, they've hijacked our own mothering instincts, and it's abusive.
Yep. And let's be honest, Christina, they preach, we will give you the forever family, but really what they're doing is making it so that you don't have a real family.
That's right.
You have a family based on these conditions.
Yep.
And in the end, how hard was it really for my mom to tell me, this is a real thing she texted to me, I don't understand how you can think all of these things, or that I'm abandoning you and blah, 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 blah. I help the prostitutes and the homeless of our city. How could I not love my own daughter?
Wow.
Oh.
And she can't even see it.
She couldn't even see that in that sentence, she had put me at the same arm's length distance of, we twist the word love in the church so much, or they twist it. I love the prostitutes. I love the homeless. I give them donations. I give them clothing. And but really, those are the people you want at arm's length. You don't actually want them in your home. You don't want them in your intimate spaces. And so you, my daughter, if I could love these whores and prostitutes, how could I not love my own daughter, who I now associate on this level of a person that I don't want in my intimate spaces? I don't want in my home. I just want you to feel love at an arm's length distance. But truthfully, even though she felt like it was such this terrible thing that she was losing her daughter, it was so easy to just cut it out and be done. When I left my family behind, truly, I mean, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but also, was it really? It was a fake family with fake love and fake relationships. I don't miss my family. I don't miss my fake relationships with my siblings that only existed upon the conditions that we were faithful to the commandments that would keep us together as a family. I despise my father. I don't miss him. I don't miss my mom. I don't miss my siblings. And it's because the church does not build forever families. They build conditional families that at an instant, if you have to choose between your family or the abuser that you are addicted to, which is the church, you choose the church every time.
That's right.
Except for rare cases like you, Christina.
I hope to not be a rare case. I really do. This is why we're talking. This is why we're telling stories, right? We're trying to make it so that nobody else does this. It's, there's so much.
And I guess
and you're right. They just will cut you off. Yeah.
Yeah. And to, I guess, go on that, what you said, that you hope to not be the exception. I wrote the song Mother's Day. It came out on Spotify a little bit after Mother's Day. I had been asked to sing at a Mother's Day event. And I just took the gig because, I love music and I love to do these things. And I don't really do anything on Mother's Day. I don't call my mom. I have a wonderful mother-in-law. I should say that. She's wonderful.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. However, I was asked to sing at this event. And so I started compiling a list of all the songs I could think of about mother relationships and what I would sing to these moms. And I remember I came home from work and I just thought, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sit there for hours and sing to these happy mother, daughter, son couples about how their beautiful, intimate love is one of the most powerful things ever. And I was
Mm-hmm.
rejected by my own mother. And I thought, I can't be the only one like this. I can't be the only one who's just hurting on Mother's Day. So I went to the
Mm-hmm.
piano, and that was another song that just poured out of me. It was written within minutes. I had it on piano. I called my studio engineer. I said, "Hey, what are you doing tomorrow?" And he was like, "Nothing." I was like, "All right, I'm coming with a song to record. It's just me and my piano." And I went and I played it in 1.5 takes. I messed up a note, but basically one take. And I went out and I basically sang it in one take because the emotions were so raw and real.
Yeah. Oh, and
And
they absolutely come through. Like, I'm not kidding when I say you can feel the pain that comes through in your voice. You can feel it. You can feel it. It's powerful. And I actually sent the link to that song to my queer child and had them listen to it. And I told them, I said, this song made me bawl. I've listened to it several times. They thought it was an amazing song. But we had a conversation about it afterwards. And I said, as I say to them a lot, like, I have so many regrets about my parenting. And I don't mean regrets that like cripple me or that I try to live in the past with. It's not like that. But so many hurts about how I raised my kids in this paradigm. And even although it hurts and I'm deconstructing it and I'm moving on from it, one of the things I said to them was, I actually never want to stop feeling that hurt because I never want to ever get to a place in my life again where I perpetrate that kind of harm or pain on another human being, let alone my own children.
that's beautiful. And your line that you said that you loved, that it's a good way to raise a child until it's not. I wrote that line because that's a line my mother actually said when I was talking with her and my now husband, who at the time I was just talking with him. We were present, and my mother vehemently, almost growled, "It was a good way to raise a child," trying to protect herself. And because she had 4 other children she had to think about. And
Right.
the guilt that you feel if you face the fact maybe it wasn't a good way. And so that's why that line is in the song, is because that's a real line that my mother said and that I can imagine many other moms feel when they're on the brink of, do I listen to my child? Do I leave behind this religion, this addiction to this cult to be there for my kid? That's a line that enters a lot of people's heads.
It does. And I say all the time that I think one of the hardest parts of deconstruction is ownership. And I think when mothers say things like, it was a good way to raise a child, that's a way to deflect ownership. You know, I tell people all the time coming out of this, the pain in it often stems from having to own my own shit, from having to sit in the shit that I realized I not only believed, I raised my kids in it, I upheld patriarchy, I upheld racism, let's face it, right?
Oh, me too, yeah.
I
Blacks
upheld
were descendants of
homophobia.
Cain, all the way.
Right. I upheld homophobia. It is hard and gross to say that out loud, but I don't think we can get past it until we own it and sit in it and feel the messiness of it.
Yeah.
I
love hearing different perspectives of different people like from a mom listening to Mother's Day is so beautiful, because I am a stepmom. I keep my private life pretty private on social media because I don't need people messing with him or my husband or anything. But I am a stepmom, and it puts into perspective for me a lot of how it would feel to be a mom and listen to that. But to hear a mother from the church talk about my song like that is one of the most beautiful gifts you could ever give me. Anyone, like, I'll never get tired of, in a way, like, does it feed my ego? Yes, to hear that, I had a good song, but truthfully, the gift of knowing that the pain and emotions that I had to put into sitting in that shit, and trying to make something of it so that others could know that they're not alone. The greatest gift anyone can ever give me is to share with me how the songwriting affects them. So I deeply thank you, Christina, for your words.
And I thank you for creating that music. It's powerful, very powerful.
It is. Something that between the conversation that you guys were having about being a mom and I raised all three of my kids in the church. My middle son left or stopped believing when he was probably between 12 and 14. My oldest son only went because he liked that we could all be together as a family and not an eternal family. He just liked that we were spending time together. But my daughter, when she left, I don't remember if it was a Sunday. It seems like it was a Sunday. One of the things that I was afraid of is that I was going to go to church alone. So I was going to be there by myself. And that seems like a silly thing as I say it right now, but it's kind of symbolic where I'm left to go to church on Sunday every morning or every Sunday morning. And I will be left in the celestial kingdom by myself. So I'm going to just be by myself. Nobody else is going to be there with me. Besides that, though, when my daughter told me that she didn't believe in the church anymore, I had that grief that I had talked about earlier. And her response to me was, "Mom, we are all good people." And I just sat there with that. And it's like there has to be a switch for people to finally realize you're choosing something that is abusing not only you but your children also, and the whole family, and making it so you can't actually have authentic connection with each other. But you're also getting to a point where you can't even think for yourself, to the point that you can say, my child is more important than this organization. And if I have to choose between the two, why would I choose an organization that causes so much cognitive dissonance, causes so much self-gaslighting, causes so much manipulation of truth? So my kids leaving the church saved me. And I know Christina and I have talked about this before, that our children have saved us. And it's not to compare it to having a dog, but because that's not what it's like. But when a lot of people get a dog, they say that, they rescued the dog, but really the dog rescued them. Well, having children, if you don't grow and allow your children to teach you, then you've missed the lesson. You've missed point.
100%, I concur.
You're so stuck in your ways and your beliefs that you're not willing to be open to new ideas and new learning. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more.
And I'm going back to something that you had said earlier, Kendra. The stories that you share and the similarities in your stories, and when you talk to me, who, I am probably hit or miss, close to half your age, but we all share the same experiences in one way or another. and certain things that you guys have said, even throughout this podcast interview. Excuse me. Or Christina, when I was listening to your interview earlier of your own personal story, you bring up things that I have written songs about, in-depth thought to these specific things, and it is so amazing to me because I'm not in Utah. I'm out in, non-Mormon world. Grew up in a branch in Illinois, outside of Chicago. And so I'm not in Utah County or anywhere close to it. Even Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, California, you can find a Western Mormon population.
Correct.
That's not the case for me.
Mm-hmm.
So to be exposed to women like you, who, when you share your stories, and for example, Christina, in your interview, you talk about the cage. You talk about feeling as though you lived your life in a cage, and the entire time the cage door was open. Yep. You just didn't know you could step out. It was this imaginary wall that was there. I have written a song called Freedom Was Pain that describes whenever I left and found freedom, it was the most painful thing I ever experienced, because to find that freedom and to be that lonely in that freedom was the most painful thing I experienced. And at the end of the chorus, the line says, I won't actually give it away because the album's not out yet, but it compares it to a cage. And it talks about stepping out of that cage. I cannot wait for you to hear that song.
I was just getting ready to say, I cannot wait to hear it.
If you liked Mother's Day, Freedom Was Pain was another song that's very special to me, that when I sat down, I was in a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Minnesota, in northern Minnesota, and it was raining, and it was me and my notepad, and there was silence. My husband and I had gone up there and with the intention of songwriting for me. And it was this like magical experience where he didn't say a word for probably 2 hours because he just knew that I needed this silence. And I wrote this song, and it's one of the most beautiful things I think I've written, and I am so excited for you to hear it. I hope we can have like another pre-album podcast where I'll give you a preview of some of the songs and we can talk about them.
I would love nothing more.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. And then from you, Kendra, I mean, you were talking about the PTSD, and I was just like, ding, ding, ding. I have another track called PTSD that is also a very I'm so proud of that song. I mean, and it's a completely different genre switch, right? My previous album is very Americana-esque, very, there's some fiddle and acoustic guitar and some kind of rock stuff like Colorado or Quetico-ish, bluesy. But this next one really delves into my story, my leaving the church, my personal chapter book. So it's really, the album is a chapter book that describes every stage I went through leaving the church, which is why I find it so incredible that these chapters that I've written in music are the exact same chapters that you have experienced. And the excitement for me as an artist to know that as I'm recording these in the studio, that there are women out there that do need this music, that do want to relate to it. It excites me to a level you can't understand. But yeah, what else? I think there was another interview that you guys did that you were talking about gaslighting, and I have another song called Gaslight Me that I'm so excited to release. And then there's another, obviously the identity song, where I talk about being an addict and what it means to form your own identity post trauma and rehab. Oh,
Can I comment on one of your songs?
yes, please.
The intro to your album, I think, is The Good Ship Zion. Is that correct? The Old Ship Zion. Yeah, that's right. And there's a distinct difference between the two, old and good. The Old Ship Zion is so powerful because it's not actually a song, right? It's more, it's a prologue to the rest of this album. And it goes into this whole, just kind of what we hear in the church that people post all the time, like, where will you go if you leave the boat? Like, where will you go? What will you do? You know, but to hear the perspective with which you recorded this is so powerful because I guess I can give it away. People can go listen to it and I wouldn't do it justice anyway. Everybody go listen to this. I'm just going to say that. Go listen to this. But you can hear, like, there's this fear that you can feel, like, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Like, don't leave the boat. Like, it's like the worst thing you could possibly do. And then right at the very end of this prologue, you hear the splash. And that splash, that makes me emotional too, because there's so much power. Like, it's just this culmination of, nope, I'm going to be true to me, and off I go. And you hear the splash, and it's very clear what has happened. You've jumped off the ship and you're on your own now. And then the rest of the album starts and the music starts. And I'll just share really quickly. I don't want to hijack your story or your time, but I've been going through some really deep personal conundrums and confusions and challenges lately around a lot of personal things in my life. And one of the things I had realized as I'm dissecting it all and delving into it all is that you're right. We're forever changed by being in the church. This wiring is in my brain and it's in there really deep. And I was in there twice as long as you were. And not that I'm comparing, but I mean, it's just, my point is that decades of indoctrination. And I'm realizing as I'm going through a lot of these confusions and conundrums that I am back on the ship. I'm standing at the edge. And all the voices are saying to me, what are you going to, like, don't jump off the boat. Like, what are you thinking? Don't be stupid. Like, everything is right here. And yet I have this compulsion to jump into the water. And I'm getting really, really, really close. But every time I have these discussions, it empowers me a little bit more. And I'm getting a little bit closer to the edge. And I'm almost ready to jump. But that's a very powerful way to begin that album. It is, what do you call the audio? I was going to say it is a visual too, because you can visualize it in your head. It's absolutely a visual, but just the sounds, the voices, you can hear some birds in the background, like you hear the water and then boom, you hear this splash, and the splash is just so empowering. I don't even know if I'm making sense, but
Christina,
you've excited me. Yeah, go Kendra.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Christina, you know that you can swim, right? We've talked about this. They tell us you can't swim. And they also tell you that that Satan has power over the water. But the reality about that is that our bodies are 70% water. So there's a lot that you have to justify and you have to try to make sense of. But this also brings me back to the song, Reap What I Sow, where at the very end it says, I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that just says to me, I'm never coming back, you know?
I fucking did it. Look at me. Look at me on this beach Look at me giving you my middle finger. And it's just a speck in the distance, the ship. They can't even see you anymore. They've left you behind for sure.
Yeah, they don't really even care anymore. In fact, you're dangerous to them. So we're actually just not going to have anything to do with you now.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't even exist anymore.
Yep. Thank you.
Which actually, that brings me back to another point where when you were talking about cutting ties with your family, Kendra and I talk about this all the time, this idea of chosen family and how it is that just because someone birthed you does not mean they get to be in your life. It doesn't mean they have some special position. The only people we want in our lives are the people that see us, love us for exactly who we are, and where we're having exchanges of energy, where it's an energy exchange, it's not an energy sucking. There is absolutely nothing wrong with cutting ties with blood family if they are not treating you appropriately. And we've got to get rid of this idea that we have to remain connected to people even when they're treating us poorly. It doesn't make any sense. And so this idea of chosen family, I now have several people that I consider family that are my chosen family. I wouldn't trade for anything because they make me a better person. They make me want to love more. They make me see the world in a better light. Yeah.
That's yes. Just yes. And the amount of women that have written things like that in their letters, once again, scientific data and proof that this is not an exception. This is what is normal when you leave a cult, when you leave Mormonism. Mm-hmm. The people that come to the realization that family is not blood is so empowering once you can choose your own family. I love the line in Reap What I Sow. I'm so proud of this line. My mother's blood runs through my veins, but we haven't spoken years. Mm-hmm. If we did, maybe I'd ask her, what's it like to become your worst fear? Yeah. Because her worst fear was to not have this perfect family. Her worst fear was to not have the celestial kingdom be everything she wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. So to have this perspective of blood running through your veins, but to have that separation. I don't need you anymore, but tell me, what's it like on the other side? Did you get everything you wanted? I hope you did, because I'm getting everything I want and I need from the relationships that I'm building. So,
yep.
And right then and there is this separation. You will live your life and I will live mine. But let me reap what I sow, because I am sowing my own seeds.
Yeah. What I thought about that also when I was listening to that over and over and over again was that what is my worst fear as a mother? My worst fear would be to lose one of my children, would be that one of them would die. But being in the church, one of your worst fears as a mother is that your children will fall away, will walk away, will leave the church. And so the effort is, I love you in spite of what you do when someone leaves the church, instead of I love you in every choice that you make, because I know that you believe that those choices are good for you at this time. And I love you because you're your own person. I love you and whatever you want to be, whatever you decide to be. It's I love you except. I love you in spite of.
I love you but.
I love you but. And I think that is my worst fear, is that I have conditions on my love. And I think I did for such a long time. I had conditions on my love. And it's good to be out. It's good to be out and to be able to see people and love them completely, love them no matter what, and I hate that word, no matter what, because it implies that there's something wrong. but I love them unconditionally. I understand what unconditional love is now.
Yep. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love that, I can see the stats of what songs are being listened to on Spotify and Apple Music. And most of my listeners, because I'm not in Utah or out west, a lot of my listeners are fans that have never been Mormon. They don't even have a clue of what the Old Ship Zion means. So right now, and I hope that this changes, I am actively looking for opportunities to tour or do things in Utah. And so I am putting this out there. If you guys have any connections to any women's groups or anyone listening, I am actively looking to put together something next summer where I am doing workshops, speaking, and music in a collective tour to try and truly help ex-Mormons. So I'm just throwing that out there, casting that net and seeing what comes back to me.
And I'm going to tell you right now that there's going to be a fish that's going to get into that net today, and we'll talk about it after this interview is done.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
Get you in touch with the ERA, one of the ERA directors here, the Equal Rights Amendment directors here.
That would be beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'll delve into that a little more so people can understand exactly what I'm trying to do. Don't let me forget, Christina, that I did want to get a little geeky with you on some of the things happening in Old Ship Zion. I want to give you the writer's perspective on what I was doing in that song.
Oh,
and that
good. I'm taking notes.
Yep. Remind me.
I will.
But my goal for Irene's Entropy, I own it as a company outright. It is 100% owned by me. And the goal of Irene's Entropy, like I said, is not just music. I've talked with some people that have asked me to come speak at college events for LGBTQ. And I'm looking to get more into that section where it is not just me putting on a rock and roll show. I want to develop a system where I come and there are people listening to me and there are questions that can be asked. What were you thinking when you wrote this lyric? Why did you write this song? People can share experiences and I can share my perspective as an artist and as a writer. But also, I can start including other factors where I am helping to educate women. This is how you have the tools to rebuild yourself. This is psychologically what is happening to you. And these are the things that you can use to climb out of that cage, to empower yourself. And eventually, I would love to get into a sector where I am specifically, because of my background, empowering women to get their education. Really, in the STEM world of science and math, there's not enough women there. And I would love to start something where, and this is me dreaming big, and I hope I'm not giving away my business plan. I have everything written out in a business plan, and I own copyrights to everything. I've tried to be very smart with the way that I'm building this business so that I have a lawyer, I have my copyrights, trademarks, and everything lined up in place. The artist that I have doing things for the Identity Project signs a worker's contract, and everything is laid out in documentation, because this is something that I'm very serious about. I say that. But the eventual business plan is to somehow do something where I am combining an intersectionality of education, science, STEM, as well as music, that also feeds into helping women who have escaped trauma situations and empowering them to not just escape their trauma, but to not repeat their trauma by breaking the cycle and having the tools they need to become women that are not codependent. And I think that that can be done with guidance into the STEM education world, as well as combining where art and science meet. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It makes brilliant sense because art and science actually go hand in hand. And we know that music enhances learning as well, which is why I get so angry when school systems, the first thing they do when there are budget cuts is get rid of art and music. And it's like the worst thing you can do for people's brains.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think what you were saying about helping women who have been through trauma not repeat their trauma, not repeat their intergenerational trauma, also breaking the cycle. But also, so I mean, I think that it would be something that would be good to even team up if you'd like to on that project, because in telling their story, people have to get to a certain point before they're willing to tell their story publicly. People have to get to a certain point before they're capable of even finding their voice. And so helping trauma survivors to find their voice, helping them to live authentically and trust themselves when it's been such a long period of being told that your voice doesn't matter, or because you've done these things that are your fault, but they were really related to your trauma, decision making, how to go through school in fight or flight all the time is sometimes a catalyst, but a lot of times it's an impedance to helping people to be able to comprehend or even, apply the information that they're gaining. So for me, I'm a hands-on person. Like, you can teach me in a classroom all day long, but I am going to dissociate from the lecture. I may even be able to write notes and not even remember anything that I wrote. And so the only way for me to learn really is to be hands-on. I'm kind of a, you throw me in and I dive in head first, and it's baptism by fire, all these sayings that we have that, I can learn, but I don't learn the same way as a trauma survivor. I don't learn the same way. It's just not possible for me to sit through lectures. And so then I'm sitting through a lecture, and then I'm also teaching myself at the same time, and it takes twice as long. Anyway, I think it's a great idea.
No, I feel that completely. I have the same struggles, but I think that the beauty of one being in a place where we were not able to learn. We physically did not know how to learn. We just knew how to be told what to believe. And that waking up, that, as Christina said earlier, seeing the trees in the different colors, seeing everything with a new vision. There is a hunger for education like you cannot believe. It is an unquenchable thirst to know, what have I been missing this whole time? And if you don't hit that at the right moment and there is not help for that, it can be lost. But in a way, it's not lost, I suppose. There is always that hunger, but there is a moment. There is that moment when you leave and you're just ready to have that experience of learning. And some people kind of miss that boat. And I want to create a space where eventually more than women, but right now I have to focus, and it is specifically on women. A place where women can find that support they need to not just talk about their emotions. I think it's incredible how many places there are, such as your podcast, to be able to talk about the emotion, to have support groups where everyone is supporting each other's experiences. But let's take it a step further. Let's create a space where there are opportunities for you to not just express your feelings and feel accepted, but to make that change. A huge lyric in this song Identity that is going to come out is at the very end, the lyric switches in the chorus and it says, to learn is to change. And I believe strongly that that space that needs to be there to help women change and to help them do that through education is so vitally important. And I want to be a person that creates that for women. And that is the end goal of Irene's Entropy.
That's awesome. It's really awesome.
So awesome.
I think one thing that you had mentioned, I think I had mentioned something about giving him a voice. You were talking about making sure women are empowered to go to school. A lot of people in the Mormon church, I think, believe that their place is in the home. A lot of women believe that their place is in the home and that their number one priority is their children. But I think also in leaving the church that women need to know that it's okay to put themselves first, to take care of themselves, to ensure that they can financially support themselves. Because there's a lot of leaving women who leave the church who are completely unprepared to leave the church, to leave the support. I'm putting air quotes in support because really what support is it?
Yeah. Yep. I relate to that. I was never going to have a degree. I was just going to get married super young and start having babies. My sister dropped out of college to start a family and start having kids. My mother never got an education and she had 5 children. And even if she wanted to leave my father, she couldn't do it because she had no way to support those 5 children.
Yep.
Yeah, I was lucky in the extreme that I went to nursing school before I had babies, before I even got married, because when the time came down the road where I got divorced, I never had to wonder what was going to happen to me. I knew that I was going to be okay because I had a nursing license and I was working. And so many women don't have that. They don't have that. One of our previous guests made the point that when people in the church get divorced, the women always get screwed because of this teaching. Like, for us, education was always kind of, when I was growing up in the 80s in the youth program, education was an afterthought. You did it just in case your husband died, just in case something happened, just in case you had to make a little extra money for the family. But it was never a career track. Like, you weren't supposed to spend a lot of time on your career. Pick something like teaching where you could do it while the kids were in school, but then you could be home after school. And don't pick a high powered career that was going to take you away from the family. And so you're right. A lot of people that come out of the church, a lot of women that come out of divorce or in certain situations are wholly unprepared. In fact, I'm sort of connected to somebody right now in the ex-Mormon world who is going through this. She got divorced. She's got 2 little kids and she's having an incredibly difficult time finding work, that she's kind of stuck in this position where she doesn't have a degree. So she's got to get something that doesn't require a degree, but that also pays enough for her to make her ends meet. But then she's got the added burden of childcare. So she's trying to find something that kind of she can do from home, because the second you have to pay for childcare on a salary, not any, but on a lot of salaries that don't require degrees, your entire paycheck's now going to your childcare. And so she's just having such a hard time. And I feel super duper duper lucky that I didn't have that issue. So anyway, that to say, I think your point is very valid. Go ahead, Kendra.
I got married when I was 19, had all 3 of my kids by the time I was 22 or 23. And I went to nursing school starting when my kids were still very little. And so, although some of us can say that they were smart enough to do that, to go to school before having kids. It is still possible to do it even with kids, but it takes a lot of sacrifice and a lot of organization and a lot of, yeah, I have some regrets about that too, as far as like how much time I spent on school and away from my kids, but they're all good kids. They're all good people.
Yeah. And I think that guilt is there for a mom once you have those kids. But the reality is, it's just like when you're on a plane, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then on your children.
Yep.
You have to educate yourself first, even if it's a sacrifice in those couple of seconds, those couple of years where you are not giving them the attention. That's so hard. But you have to remember that ethically, you are making the correct decision because you're showing your kids, hey, A, I can support us if I need to. B, you can do the same thing for yourselves. And this is how important education is. So kudos to you, Kendra.
Well, all three of my kids have actually said that to me. My kids really appreciated the example that I had set for them for putting my education as something that was important. So anyway, it was something I have regrets about, but I know that it was important, and no, I don't regret it now, but
yeah, you taught them how to be survivors.
Yeah.
And I love that you use the analogy of the mask on the airplane, because I'm a postpartum nurse that works with birthing moms, and when I do teaching with my moms, that's the exact analogy I use, because when we have babies, I always say when our babies are born, we are then born as mothers. And when we are born with mom guilt, and it is built in, and it comes to us the day our babies are born, if not before. And so there's this unspoken expectation that a lot of times we just put on ourselves, that the kids are going to come first every time. We will sacrifice ourselves to the death for our kids, but really, are we doing them any favors? And we're not. And I always am trying to tell my moms, like, when you get home, I know it's so easy to say sleep when the baby sleeps, but you really have to do it. You need to eat, you need to hydrate, you've got to do self-care, because if you fall apart, now your baby doesn't have a mom. And it's this same thing where you were talking about. I say, I'm using the analogy on the airplane. And the reason I use that analogy is because when it comes to kids, it's the perfect analogy, because as moms, it goes against everything we believe in to put our own mask on first, because when that plane's going down, we want to save our kids. But if we pass out from lack of oxygen, we're all goners. And so it's such a good analogy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Irene, you had said something earlier about that you had been sexually assaulted as a child. Is that part of your story that you want to share? Or I think we've done a lot of dialogue and a lot of talking about things, but I don't know if you've been able to get through all of your story.
Oh, and that's not a worry to me per se, is because part of this is that I hope that whoever's listening realize that my story is told in my music. And I hope that you're left with a desire to complete the listening of my story through either my album that is already out or my album that is going to come out, because I have a song that references my sexual abuse. And I'll just gush about it a little bit to you guys, if that's all right. I don't want to give too much away, but it's not like, I'm a super famous artist that has fans that are going to leak what's in this album. Yes, I was sexually abused as a child by a priesthood holder, and I'm not uncomfortable talking about it at all. It is a thing that happened to me and also to my younger sister, and I will not divulge the details of especially her story. But what I will say from a songwriting perspective is that my song on the album that talks about my sexual abuse is called She Has a Gun. And that is because when I was 8 years old, I remember very vividly sitting in the shower. I used to have nightmares about this man who would chase me and would play, quote unquote, the tickle game, but would be touching me and sexually assaulting me. And at that age, I remember sitting in the shower with my knees to my chest and my arms around my knees. And I remember imagining my sexual abuser entering the bathroom. And in my head, I had a gun and I would shoot him. And to be that young and to already have the trauma of, I've sat behind my father's armchair and I've thought of my own death. And now I sit and I think about murdering the man who touches me when he comes over for Sunday dinners. That is a heavy thing. And in the song, the lyrics say, in her head, she has a gun. How come no one ever comes? In her head, she has a gun. How come no one ever comes? Because the song is not just about my childhood sexual abuse. The song details other experiences of me being a young teenager, and I'm forced to enter interviews with branch presidents who have nothing but very inappropriate questions to ask me. Oh, you had this sexual encounter? Tell me, what did you feel? Did you feel warm and tingly? Where did you feel it? Tell me what position you were in. Did you take your shirt off? Tell me exactly what happened. You need to tell me these things so that God can forgive you. And the lyric in the song says, in each case, someone is down the hall, but no one she can call. Someone is down the hall, but no one she can call. So in her head, she has a gun. How come no one ever comes? Because in each scenario, be it when I was a child being sexually abused, be it when I was a 13-year-old put into an office with the branch president asking me inappropriate questions, who was down the hall every single fucking time? My mother, and in many cases, my father. And I will go forward into, in my mission, I was 20 years old at the time. And I had gone through some experiences where I was literally to the brink of insanity, scared of evil spirits possessing my body because of the culture there, the place I was living. There's lots of that stuff going on in the mission and how your garments, your magic underwear protects you. And I was living in a place, in an unsafe place, where doors were getting unlocked at night. People were coming into the home. The previous people that had lived there, people would break into the home and leave objects in there. Just like randomly, just leave a doll on the toilet. I was here. This is happening. You are not safe. And this is the place I was living. But then enters the realm of evil spirits, right? And so I would hear the door unlock in the middle of the night. And I sometimes would just convince myself it was the wind. But in the morning, the door would be unlocked. and it was not the wind that opened that door. And I would hear other missionaries talk about how when they were in the house, they would hear footsteps coming down the stairs. This sounds like a spooky, made up story, but this is all true. I was living in an unsafe place. I was a white American girl living in this home. I was unprotected. There was no one within distance of me that could have saved me. And I would lay in my bed frozen at night with insomnia, unable to sleep. I would imagine spirits sitting at the edge of my bed, watching me, waiting to prey upon me. And the only thing between me and them are these magic garments that I'm wearing. And I would curl up into a ball, and I would feel as helpless as the little girl that curled up into a ball in the shower. Who was down the hall? Who sent me on this mission? Who prepared me to go here? My mother and my father. Take it a step.
And that's the same mother who also said to you, if you perish, so be it.
Yes. So here I am, and I am not about to perish, perhaps physically, but spiritually, and in my fucked up little head, I thought that literally there were evil spirits sitting at the edge of my bed, waiting to possess me. And that is a fear that I cannot even describe to you. I cannot watch horror movies to this day. I will have nightmares for months if I do, because those things were very real to me. And so what ended up happening was we didn't have real beds. We just had some mattresses on the floor. And so my companion and I pushed our beds together to huddle for comfort in the middle of the night, just for some source of life, that we were safe and we were okay. And without giving too much detail, it ended up that we were in our underwear and she was on top of me one night. And I was kind of asleep and I didn't really know what was happening, but there were some touchings happening that would have been considered kind of sexual. And I enjoyed it. And the horror when I woke up the next morning, I would convince myself, this only happened because I was so scared of the evil spirit. But whatever else happened, I remember sternly telling my companion, this cannot happen again. Whatever just happened, I don't even know. But I was terrified because here I am, terrified to the point of thinking that I am going to be possessed by an evil spirit. And now I'm terrified of the fact that perhaps I just broke one of the most terrible mission rules, which is, sexuality. And not just with the opposite sex, but with a same-sex partner, which is such a sin. So anyways, this encounter happened. And I kept this for months. And remember, I'm trying to be the most obedient missionary of all time. And so eventually I got to the place where I had mentally torn myself down and just beat myself up to the point of almost just, I can't even describe the depression coming from the place and the identity I had built to being ripped down to this almost non-existent ghost of a girl of who I once was, with shame and guilt. So I called my mission president, and my mission president came. President Chase of the Honduras Tegucigalpa mission. May his name ring out to anyone who might know who he is. And I went into an interview with this man. I'm 20 years old. And I confess to him that I have slept with my companion. And he pauses and he says, I thought this might be the case. The Spirit has indicated to me that this is what you are going to confess. So he pulled out a laptop and he said, this is a very grave sin, hermana. And I need you to tell me every detail of what happened so that I can type it out. And then I will interview the other sister and I will ask her the same questions. And I need to know that you will both give the exact same answers. Otherwise, this could be something that I need to talk to the brethren about sending you home. And I remember crying and pleading and begging him, telling him, I am not a lesbian. I do not have feelings for women. I promise you, I'm only here to be an obedient missionary. I was only scared of the evil spirits at the end of my bed. I don't know what happened, President Chase. But he sat there and he interviewed me and he wrote down every detail. Did you put your leg over her? Your arm? Did you touch her? Did your garments come off? And I was stripped down to the same 13-year-old girl that had to have that same experience with my branch president. But here I am, an adult woman, 20 years old, reduced to the same shell of a child, reporting back to my elder. This is what I did, and this is what happened to me. There are words in the song, in the lyrics of the song that say, words wash over her like oil. She's planted in black soil, in sexuality, her roots ripped from reality. That's what I was reduced to. My roots ripped from this deep black soil that I tried so hard to root myself in this gospel. Ripped out in these interviews, in these sexual circumstances where I was made to be abused. And once again, there is another lyric that in the beginning it says, perhaps more wicked than his hands was the habit to take commands in the system just to be one more victim. Because truly, perhaps more wicked than the sexual abuse was the sin of my parents teaching me to be obedient and to take these commands. This priesthood holder touches me at 7 years old. It is a gross and terrible sin for a man to do that to a child. And later in court, I faced him. 10 years later, he was facing sexual assault from other young girls he had touched, where he had tied them up at sleepovers and penetrated them. He said, the girls want to know what it's like. They need to know what it's like. So, the sin of such a terrible, gross human being is terrifying, that there are monsters like that out there and there's nothing being done. However, let us not forget the sin of the parent who sits down the hall in the interviews, in my mission. My mom would be proud of me for telling the truth in an interview. So I'm going to say the truth of everything that happened. That is a grave sin of a parent that cannot be forgiven without retribution. And I also would like to say that whenever I was older, I remember going to my stake president and begging to speak with him about my sexual abuser. Not because I wanted to know what justice had been served to him through the church. I wanted help from my stake president to forgive my sexual abuser. Because if I could descend below all things like Christ, and I could forgive the man that sexually abused me and my sister as children, I would have reached Christ-like love. And my stake president informed me that he really thought that this man did want to repent when he interviewed him, and that I shouldn't worry about it anymore. All of these things are very traumatic. I don't know that I necessarily feel the trauma anymore. I understand what happened to me, but I have a very healthy sexual relationship with myself, with my ideas of what a healthy sexual relationship is. I have not been traumatized, or the trauma has not dirtied those parts of my life and my relationships. However, I have a righteous anger aimed towards the people that enable this thing to happen. There is another song on this album that is not a full song, similar to Old Ship Zion. It is almost a prologue, an epilogue to, not an epilogue, but a precursor to the song She Has a Gun, and it's called Enabler. And I won't say too much about it now, but it talks about the people that enable these situations. Perhaps you are not the one that had the gun to the child's head, ready to pull the trigger to commit the sexual abuse, to commit the crime. But you took the safety off on that gun. And you enabled that situation to be there, where the child didn't even have a chance. And those are very dark things that I discuss on this next album. The first album is very happy and carefree, as it really just talks about my loving relationships with others. But this next album is where I touch those things, and I deeply try to understand them in song. Because if they're not talked about, then they don't exist. And singing about them, for me, is the most powerful way I can do that. I invited a group of women, of children and women in my life that are very close to me, to be a choir in this song. And to hear the women at the very end singing, and hear them together, it is one of the most powerful things I've ever done with my music, to write this song about my sexual abuse and to include women and children that stand together in the defense of innocent children that are sexually abused, and women who do not recognize the damage that they do in putting their children in those situations. That's what I'll say about that.
Something you had said about being the worst sin, or the most grievous behavior that's not forgivable, putting children in those positions. I think just listening to you talk, one of the most enabling issues within the church is that we are told from a very young age that priesthood authority, that priesthood power is real power, and that we as members of the church are beholden to that power, that we get the benefit of that power, but we also have to obey that authority. And by obeying that authority unquestioningly and believing that these men have discernment to know when a person is not being honest, when a person is a good person, when a person is confessing their sins and they actually are sorry, versus them saying that they don't think that they're really sorry. I think the most prison-like situation with the whole thing is that I believed with all of my heart, that the church had authority that was real authority, that I had to obey it. And you mentioned that on your mission. You mentioned that when you were 13 years old, you were trying to be this good girl. You were trying to be this good person. You were scrupulous. You were trying to do all the things, check off all the boxes. And when you go in and you are doing the right thing, as far as the church is concerned, by confessing your sins, you're re-traumatized over and over and over again. And at the expense, or because of the ego of the priesthood holder, because of the ego of the abuser, because the patriarchy is going to uphold the patriarchy, and the women in the church also uphold the patriarchy, because the church is led by men who have priesthood power that they believe is real authority.
Yep.
And I'm sorry for all the things that happened to you. Your parents should have protected you. I'm sorry for the things that happened on your mission. You should have been safe. You deserve to be safe. And I think it's really important for us to be able to say to each other, and I say this to a lot of people, but I do see you, and I hear you, and I believe every word that you say. And I want you to feel validated in telling your story, knowing that the people are listening are going to hear it and use it and feel the pain that you have had, and also feel like they're not alone, which I think is the most important part of the whole thing, that we're not alone.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I am not sorry for any of my past. I am only sorry if I don't live a future that rectifies the things that happened to me and helps me to move forward and be an example to others of how to move on from a past like that. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And it goes right along with your goal, right? Of helping women and empowering women around education. All of it goes hand in hand.
Yeah. Everything is interconnected. Everything.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
And all of us that tell our stories, whether it's through your blog, whether it's through our podcast, whether it's through another podcast, whether it's through another blog, we're all doing this work to help people know that they're not alone, that they can speak.
And the collaboration is so beautiful. You know, I saw another woman on Instagram that is doing something kind of similar to what I'm doing. And at first I was just like, oh no, like she's doing this, and it's kind of like a competition now of like who can do what with these women. And then I just thought, oh no, what a disgusting way to see it. Reach out to this woman and ask her and say, would you be interested in a collaboration? Because the whole point of this is to help women and to help people. And so it's so powerful when we do tell our stories. And it's so important to keep that in mind, that it's not a competition of whose story is better or who's working on what project or who's releasing what book or what song or what, anything. All of it is power, and all of it comes from the same place. And we lose that power if we don't support each other.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
I always say there's room for everyone at the table. And when we collectively bring our voices together, we have so much more power. So much more power.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We corroborate each other's stories. We validate each other's stories so that when people listen, they can't, like you said, I think earlier, they can't deny that these things are happening. They can't deny that this was my experience, and that my experience is much like somebody else's experience, like you've done on your blog, that all of these experiences from these women have been very similar, if not almost identical in some situations, where they actually validate each other.
Yep. Absolutely.
I concur.
So once again, if anyone has made it through these almost 3.5 hours to get to this point, I invite you to please find me on Instagram or Facebook. Please message me and ask if you want to tell your story and be a part of the Identity Project. Your voice is powerful, and obviously you're more than a data point, but as a data point added to the collection, you are a powerful voice proving this is who we are. We will be seen and we will be heard. And after, we will become powerful and empower other women.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Before we close out, I just wanted to make sure you had addressed everything you wanted to address.
I do want to share with you the tiny detail from Old Ship Zion, and for you
that
to
was
go.
My next question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just some, I guess these last couple minutes. Any questions you have about lyrics or tidbits of a song? I love, as an artist, explaining different Easter eggs hidden from song to song, because there are a lot. That's how I songwrite. And one of them is that Old Ship Zion was written, obviously, to try and recreate the fear and anxiety in my head right before I jumped off the ship, which was the most terrifying experience. And I would like to point out that the first voice that says, Irene, stay on the ship, is actually the voice of my stepson. Because as a mother, and at the time, obviously, I was not a stepmom when I was in the church, but as a mom, right before you leave, who are the first voices you hear? Mom, stay on the ship. You built this family. You can't leave us here. And I intentionally put the voice of a child as the first voice that said, Irene, stay on the ship. And then eventually there are other voices, and there's a woman who is supposed to represent my mother saying, where will you go? But that's an important detail to me to point out to listeners. And then my tidbit for you as a listener is you talked about that breath I took right before I splashed into the water. I made sure that breath was copied and pasted into the song Nightmares. When you listen to the song Nightmares, and I'm on the beach and I'm singing about these nightmares I have up my sleeve, which quite literally I suffered with nightmares for months and months after I left the church. The day I stopped having them and somebody asked me about them. And I said, no, I haven't had one in a long time, actually, because I had worked through that trauma. I wrote the song Nightmares. But at that switch in between the slow part of the song and then the decision point where you decide, I'm going to be really happy about this future I have, and I'm just going to dance. The deciding breath in between those two parts of the song was copied and pasted, and it's the exact same breath that was used the moment that I decided to jump off the ship. Because I think those moments happen all the time. Mm-hmm. The traumatic one is whenever you jump ship. But after that, there's 100 other dramatic, or perhaps not so dramatic, but decision points where you have to make these decisions in your life. What am I going to choose? And that same breath is there symbolically to show that these decisions happen again and again and again. But each time, take that same breath and go forward knowing that you have the power to choose your future. You have the power to decide who you're going to be, what your identity is going to be. So that's my little tidbit for you from the album.
And that's the whole crux of Entropy, right? Moving forward.
Yep.
So something that I think is interesting about that breath is that I think Christina and I have talked about, there's a quote about taking a leap of faith. And the question is, what if I fall? But then the answer is, what if you fly? Well, if you are jumping off the side of a ship, well, what if I can swim? What if I can trust myself? So instead of a leap of faith, Christina and I have changed the word faith to trust. A leap of trust, a leap that I'm going to trust my own abilities. I'm going to trust my own knowledge. I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to trust my own intuition. And I'm going to take this leap. And yes, it's going to be a big, deep breath. I love that. I love that you put it in multiple songs. But we do have to trust ourselves. We have to trust that we will get through it.
Yep. Beautifully stated.
And there's another quote that we've shared between us too. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but and you may have heard it, something about when a bird is perched on a branch, it's not afraid that the branch is going to break because it trusts in the power of its own wings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah. And I could just talk about deep song lyrics for hours, but I know that our conversation is coming to an end, but birds fascinate me. My husband is an avid birder, and we go birding often, and I know the species of many birds. I have my life list. But yeah, the line in Colorado that says, birds live in cages, thinking for ages. Their own wings are wicked, starved with lies only to be fed truths that only made them sicker. It's another one of my favorite lines I've written.
That's good. That's
birds
really good.
And yeah.
That's very powerful.
Yeah. So love that quote about birds.
I know that a few minutes ago you had said, if anybody's listening and interested to reach out on Facebook or whatnot, would you tell people one more time exactly where they can find you?
Yes. You can find my website, irenesentropy.com. Irene's without an apostrophe. Entropy is ENTROPY. irenesentropy.com, or on Instagram, I am irenes.entropy. And on Facebook, you can search Irene's Entropy, and it should come up. If you go on Spotify or Apple Music, my album is called High Water. 2 separate words, High Water by Irene's Entropy. And there's also the single Mother's Day. And there should be new stuff coming out. There should be a single released later this year. There's a lot of other fun tidbits I have being recorded in the studio now, ready to be released. And after that album, I've already written another EP. I've already started an album after that. There's lots on the way. So please stick around, and please know that there are really cool things coming.
And if anyone wants to be a part of your identity project, where is the best place for them to find that information?
You can go to my website and you can go to the Identity Project, read the blog, kind of see what the letters are. And the best place to contact me right now is probably Instagram. I am on Facebook, TikTok, and I have a contact sheet on my website you can fill out. So feel free to use any of those facets to contact me. The contact form on my website. However, I'm most active on Instagram and will probably see it sooner if you contact me on Instagram. Just message me.
Perfect. And also for anyone that's interested, Irene also has some really cool merchandise on her website, and that's another great way to support her. Like I said, you won't be able to see during us for this interview, but we are rocking some high water tank tops that are pretty amazing. This has been the most amazing conversation. Thank you so much for what you're doing, for reaching out for this identity project, I can't even keep up. You're just this phenomenal human being that's got this amazing brain that is using it in so many beautiful ways to help people heal. And I hope to help yourself heal. And certainly you've been a part of my healing process. And I think I can speak for Kendra when I say the same thing, because we talk together and she'll share with me. She's like, oh my gosh, have you listened to this? One of her songs. I've had it on repeat. This is amazing. And we talk back and forth, but
thank you.
Thank you for coming and for sharing and being vulnerable and trusting us in this space. We appreciate it so much. You're phenomenal. And I really just can't wait to sit back and see where you go, because I have a feeling you are just scratching the surface of the amazing things that you're going to accomplish.
Thank you. That means a lot.
We're always looking for a new song for our intro song. We've loved the song that we've had so far from Cody Francis, but perhaps we can discuss.
Yep, I have lots of songs. Like I said, not only is there another album in the studio, there's another EP, another album after that, and then other songs I've written on the side that don't have a home yet. So maybe we can, a couple specifically that don't have a home yet, that maybe could fit this really well.
Okay.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're amazing.
Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. You can find us on the web at latterdaysurvivors.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Latter-day Survivors, and we're on Twitter at LD Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life, can remind us that we are not alone in this.
Oh my child, I know not your fault and you don't deserve all the bad and the hurt. I know you tried so hard. I know you've done your part. It's not fair. You did your time. How much longer will you suffer in this life? But don't give up. Just hold on tight. It'll be alright. All your life you've tried to be a good man inside. Did everything that you thought you should. Didn't seem to do you any good. I know you've tried so hard. I know you've done your part. It's not fair. You did your time. How much longer will you suffer in this life? But don't give up.